Hey, I'm Mr. Ghost. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. I found something I wasn't supposed to. I genuinely think I stumbled across something I shouldn't have. Let me explain. I'm a 27-year-old medical student. Nothing special or out of the ordinary about it. It was a stable path I was planning to be on. Since I was as young as I can remember. I always had other passions and interests though. One being that a buddy of mine for the sake of this. His name is Jack, and I have always had an interest in exploring abandoned places. Old factories, decrepit buildings, things like that. So much so that back in August we decided to start recording our outings as we planned to gather content to start our own YouTube page. We were ready to start our channel but decided to record one more trip before our first upload and a regular posting schedule because the circumstances around it seemed like something that would garner a lot of attention. I'm no computer whiz, but Jack went to school for cybersecurity, so he was going to handle the tech side of our page. One night he and I were at his apartment, where he has a massive computer setup to which I can only describe as movie-like. Jack was browsing a dark web forum, and not even sure it's called the dark web, but it's that shady part of the internet where you have to download a separate browser, which he does pretty regularly. Nothing malicious at all, he says it's actually a good place to learn about high-level computer stuff. Although on this night, he ended up on a forum for extreme urban explorers, people who travel all across the world doing the stuff we did, visiting abandoned places. In hindsight, it should have struck me as odd that this forum wasn't on the regular internet, given that it's pretty much sharing videos and locations that would otherwise be relatively easy to find, or at least that's what I thought. I was scrolling my phone when Jack turned away from his monitor and toward me. "Check your spam email," he said. I had a separate email account dedicated to junk, and those enter your email for a free trial sites. I don't even remember telling him about my spam account, but he was a tech guy so I didn't question it. Sure enough, my inbox had an email forward. It didn't have an original address, just a random string of letters and numbers. In the body of the email was a set of coordinates that was also a hyperlink. I clicked on it, and it brought me to a Dropbox file that Jack had made private for he and I. On it was a PDF. It was 3 pages. The first had the same coordinates typed out at the top, as well as a very grainy overhead satellite image of what looked like a rocky ocean cliffside. Under that was the same image, but in a thermal view. That image had a date and timestamp in the bottom corner. The month and day were redacted, but the year was this one, 2025. Additionally, the image had 6 red little dots arranged in 2 small groups of 3, each group aligned with a building jutting out of the cliff that I couldn't make out. I scrolled to the next page. These were a set of 4 screen captures, each one looking like a frame from a Call of Duty level, only these were not from any game. "What am I looking at?" I asked while analyzing the images. "I don't know, but it checks out." I looked through the metadata on the photos, and they are most certainly not edited or photoshopped. Jack replied. The rest of the PDF file was similar images, except one stood out. The perspective was down the barrel of a sighted assault carbine, through a night vision filter. 3 guys dressed in tactical gear were lined up next to each other beside an old, beaten-up wooden door fitted poorly into a cobblestone and brick structure. Metal bars covered scarce dirty glass windows on the walls. There was an old padlock on the door that had clearly been broken off. The structure was surrounded by dying trees and sat perched on the cliffside overlooking a vast darkness, to which I could only assume was the ocean. Jack began to speak as I scrutinized every aspect of this document. Some account I've never seen post on this forum just uploads these photos about 3 weeks ago. Overnight it blows up with wild theories from all the regulars in the comment section. The general consensus was that it was likely some film student playing a joke. Admittedly I agreed, but I had been thinking about it on and off still for a few days. Then yesterday I get a private message from the original poster of the images, the coordinates I sent you. That was it. No other information. And when I tried to reply it said that the account was deactivated, so I started digging some more. Those coordinates don't show up on any open source search engine. Same thing on the Tor browser. Believe it or not, the only thing I could find was in the school library. Something about how a bunch of building permits were rushed for construction in a local town in the early days of World War I, not too far from there. Only there's no record of any sort of land parcel nearby. The coordinates are 25 miles off the coast of New Zealand, middle of the ocean. Clearly there's something there. I don't know what, but it could be a great idea to film us digging more into this and then travel to find whatever the place in that video is. I sat there still, partly trying to make sense of this odd scenario, and using the logical part of my brain to try and explain the questions I still had, none of which were answered. I'm not a big conspiracy theorist or someone who considers themselves paranoid by any means, so I figured there was no harm in trying to go. Spring break had just begun anyway, and I had the money for it. I agreed to go. Good, because our flight leaves in a few hours, Jack said as my phone beeped with an email notification. Subject line: FWD, your travel confirmation. I'm going to skip over the non-important travel details and fast forward a bit. After settling in at our hotel, we decided to go to the nearby fishing wharf to see if locals knew anything about the coastal geography. The wharf was old and otherwise could be defunct if it weren't for a few small fishing dinghies and some gruff-looking fishermen wandering the docks. We struck up a conversation with one of the fishermen untying his boat from the pier. His name tag said Andy on it. We asked if he knew about anyone that looked out of place coming around asking odd questions, any weird events, or things of the sort. He seemed to shrug us off, saying that he sees the same people working the same shifts every day for as he has for the past 50 years. Jack pulled out a paper from his bag with the coordinates written down. He asked the fisherman if we could join him on his boat, and we'd pay him to take us there. Andy glanced at the paper half-heartedly, but then almost as if seeing a ghost, his gaze stayed on the numbers. They'll take you there, but you're in and out within the hour. No more than that or I leave without you. Mighty, you know what's out there, I interjected. An old lighthouse. That's it. If you know what's good for you, you'll turn back and go home. If you don't, meet here at midnight. Jack and I, both somewhat spooked but unwilling to admit it to the other, agreed and paid Andy half his fee up front. We went back to the hotel, packed our gear into a bag, and got a few hours rest before going back to the wharf. We started our recording as soon as we left the hotel. Both of us wore a harness with a small but powerful camera attached, connected to a large hard drive to make sure we could capture everything. We'd edit the footage later, or so we thought. The boat ride was quiet and cold. Nobody spoke, and even if we did, it most likely would have been unintelligible as the small boat's motor tore through the waves and choppy water. A small shadow appeared on the horizon, and its shapely darkness grew bigger and bigger as the boat got closer. Eventually we pulled alongside of a severely unstable wooden dock, consisting of split boards barely held together by deformed and rusted nails. As soon as we got off the boat, the fisherman handed us a timer counting down from 1 hour. People say devices get weird over here. Andy didn't even stop the motor as he sailed off into the darkness. Both of us turned our flashlights on and began our way up the rickety metal stairs that wrapped up the cliffside. Atop the staircase was a metal landing that led to the backside of an old lighthouse. In the distance was an old forest of mostly dead trees. We cautiously walked around the perimeter, shining our flashlights at details of the lighthouse, until we reached the front door. It was the same as the one in the photo, except now the broken padlock was in the dirt below, and the door was slightly ajar. I walked over and grabbed the handle, only for it not to budge. I tried again, putting more force into it, and the door creaked loudly as it dragged through the mud that built up at the bottom. I stepped inside and shined my flashlight up. A long winding set of stairs wound upwards to a platform that had a huge two-sided spotlight on it, encapsulated by panoramic glass windows, seemingly too dusty even for that light to penetrate. The stairs were broken apart in many places, so climbing up wasn't an option. We looked around inside, and there was nothing significant other than old tools and busted-up radio equipment. Jack and I walked back outside into the forest and began to follow a very overgrown path that led further inland. It stopped almost abruptly at what clearly used to be an old fence line. The chain link was in pretty bad shape and had many spots that were big enough to climb through, so we stepped in and walked another few yards before coming alongside a small cement building, almost resembling that of a war bunker. There was a sign on the wall that said, "Keeper's Quarters." There was a huge metal door next to it. and when I lifted my flashlight to inspect the outside closer, the door was covered in writing. Small symbols and drawings littered not just the door but a good part of building's facade. However, I felt a pit in my stomach when I made out what was written on the door. Stay away from the light, it was written in what looked like white spray paint. I backed away, and in doing so tripped over something on the ground. It was a gun, or what was left of one. It was broken in 2 pieces, its jagged metal edges seeming to suggest the weapon had been ripped through with ease. I recognized it as the same kind from the one in the photo. "Is that what I think it is?" Jack asked. "What's left of it?" I replied. The metal door had a big steel beam barricading it across, with a large wheel in the center. I grabbed one side and turned. The beam not budging at first, but then abruptly caving under the force. The wheel spun and the door swung open. Our flashlights illuminated a short hallway with doorways on either side. 2 on the left, 1 on the right. The 2 entrances on the left were wide open, their doors on the floor as if torn off the hinges. One room was a small washroom, and the other was a joint kitchen, slaving area. "We're getting great footage," Jack said as we approached the closed door on the other side of the hallway. "I still don't get what's up with this place," I said, unsure of the seeming excitement that he displayed. I checked Andy's timer. 0 hours 32 minutes and 0 seconds it read. This door looked out of place. Upon further inspection, the door wasn't attached to the hinges and was being held firmly upright by something on the other side. Jack and I lowered our shoulders into the door and began to push against it. It slowly opened just enough that we could both squeeze into the room on the other side. The first thing I noticed was the smell. The door was being held up by stacked file cabinets, a bed frame, and a chair that were all pushed up like a barricade to prevent someone getting in. The room was larger than the others, and pretty empty considering all the furniture was piled behind us. I pointed my flashlight across the room, and that's when I saw it. The source of the smell, slumped over in a chair on a desk. It was a body. Jack and I both looked at each other. Me, being the med student, had the stronger stomach of the both of us, so I walked over. The man was dressed in a lab uniform. Dried blood surrounded the floor around him and stained the wood of the desk. In his hand was a pistol, but a more modern one. Not like a World War I era sidearm that a bunker like this might have. No, it was sleeker, more like a tactical pistol the military or SWAT might carry. It looked out of place. There was an empty typewriter that the man's head fell to rest on. There was a hole in the back of the head as well. But perhaps the most disturbing part of this was that this wasn't an old corpse. A few weeks at most, month tops. Additionally, the bullet hole in the back of his head is an entry wound, not an exit wound that someone who shot themselves at their desk would have. Also, the bullet was precisely coated, right at the base of the brain stem and the spinal column. I didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. Call the police. And say what? We went and followed some shady clues that led us to something we don't fully understand, but the one thing we do know is that someone is clearly orchestrating some giant over-up. They'd laugh us out of the station. Plus at this point we might already be in too deep. Jack and I knew that now. We decided to look around one last time and grab anything that might be considered evidence of something weird going on. The room wasn't anything special. Just a normal crew quarters a team of 1 to 3 people could live in while they maintained the island and lighthouse. I looked at the body one last time. This time I noticed something tucked under the desk. A small ammo crate. The man's hand was in rigor mortis, and a finger was pointed right at it. How much more obvious of a clue do you need? Clearly he wanted someone to find that case after he met his end. I grabbed it and pulled it toward me. Jack crouched beside me, and I flipped open the metal latch. It was lined with bullets stacked in rows neatly organized. I stuck my hand in to push aside the ammunition, and my hand felt something underneath. I grabbed hold of it. It was a small package, wrapped up in old paper and tied off. Wedged in between the rope and the package was a folded set of papers. I glanced back at the timer. 0 hours 7 minutes and 0 seconds. Shit. Jack and I didn't even bother opening it. I just tucked it away in my backpack, and we quickly began making our way out of the building, and back on our way toward where Andy dropped us off. We made it back to the boat in time, and we were heading back to the mainland within a few minutes. Andy dropped us back at the wharf, and I handed him the rest of the cash, plus a little extra. He nodded at us both. and his parting words stuck with me. Hope you didn't find whatever it is you were looking for. And here we are, back to this post. We got back and opened the package. I'm not going to try and make sense of it right now. I don't want to. When we went to upload the footage from our cameras, all the files were corrupted. It was inaccessible. That, in addition to what we found when we eventually opened the package, led us to decide that was enough. We weren't going to even attempt our YouTube page anymore. I've uploaded the scans and other applicable contents and photos of the package into one large file. I don't know if I should continue this thread here and upload everything I can. Maybe I should. I'm going to sleep on it. If I decide to update, it'll be on this thread. Maybe this account will be gone in 24 hours. Stay tuned, I guess. Man in Black, Devil Kidnapping. This is a story that happened to my neighbor, an elderly lady, more precisely, to her grandson. I have edited it and added a touch of my imagination. If you're curious about what supposedly really happened, feel free to ask me in the comments. The story takes place in my small hometown, whose name I will keep to myself. Instead, I will use a fictional town in the story, and all the characters are entirely fictional. Springstown, New York, August 2011. In the first half of August 2011, on a scorching, cloudless day in the small town of Springstown, tucked in the green heart of upstate New York, the heavy summer air clung to everything like a wet blanket. Outside a modest modern suburban home with white siding and gray stone steps, two boys played beneath the blinding afternoon sun, 8-year-old Larry Shelton and 10-year-old James Bale. The house belonged to Timothy and Harriet Shelton, who lived there with their children, Lillian and Larry. On that day, James and his parents, Stephen and Joanna Bale, were visiting. Stephen, a stocky man with tired eyes, was Timothy's cousin, and beside him sat Joanna, always elegantly dressed, her golden hair perfectly styled, her smile polite but distant. The Bales lived on a nearby farm, just beyond the outskirts of Springstown, surrounded by endless fields of wheat and the distant silhouettes of the Catskill Mountains. Inside the coolness of the house, sheltered from the oppressive heat, the adults sat around the kitchen table, the smell of cold beer and light conversation filling the air. The women spoke softly, the men laughed a little too loudly, and the sounds of the boys' game drifted in through the half-open window. Lillian, Timothy and Harriet's 18-year-old daughter, was away somewhere in town with her boyfriend, unaware of the strange, unsettling afternoon that was about to unfold. Outside, the streets were eerily empty. It was the kind of quiet that only came in late summer, when the sun was still too strong for people to venture out, and everyone waited for dusk to bring relief. It was an hour before sunset, the golden hour when shadows grow long, and the world feels like it's holding its breath. Larry and James tossed a faded football back and forth, their small voices breaking the silence, until James grew thirsty and ran back inside, calling out for Mrs. Harriet to bring him a glass of water. As he waited by the hallway, Larry remained in the yard, shifting his weight impatiently, longing for the game to continue. What neither boy knew was that their quiet, ordinary afternoon was about to fracture like glass. Larry, who had already known loss far too young, having recently mourned his loyal dog, Simon, who had vanished into the vast Catskill woods without a trace, now stood alone in the front yard. His parents had suffered even greater tragedy, losing Harriet's mother, Angelina Frank, who had been mauled by a black bear just about a month earlier, not far from her summer villa deep in the forested hills. And then, without warning, Larry heard a voice. "Hey there, little one," said a man standing at the end of the driveway. A stranger, a silhouette against the golden sky. The man's appearance was unsettling, to say the least. He was tall, slender but strong, dressed absurdly for the weather, a long black overcoat falling almost to his boots, dark trousers, and polished black shoes that gleamed faintly under the sun. His hair was coal black, neatly combed, and his face was beautiful, almost unnaturally so, like something from a painting or a dream. His eyes, pitch black, locked on Larry's, and there was something in them, something magnetic and terrifying at once. Larry stood frozen, his small fists clenched around the football. "Don't you remember me, kiddo?" the stranger asked, smiling as if speaking to an old friend. His voice was smooth as silk, but there was a chill beneath it, like the whisper of winter wind in the middle of August. Before Larry could even respond, before he could scream or run, the world seemed to shift, and he was gone. Inside the house, James finished his water and walked back outside, expecting to see his friend waiting, ready to resume their game. But the yard was empty, silent. At first James thought it was a joke, that Larry was hiding, trying to spook him. He wandered around, calling his name, but the silence only grew heavier. A knot of fear coiled in his stomach. He ran back inside, breathless. "Larry's gone," he blurted, his voice breaking. The adults froze. Harriet's glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor. Timothy, Stephen, and Harriet rushed outside, calling Larry's name, their voices growing desperate. Joanna knelt beside James, trying to calm him as he fidgeted with the small silver crucifix that hung around his neck, a gift from his grandmother. His lips moved silently, praying, hoping, begging. The search began immediately, neighbors alerted, voices echoing through the streets, into the fields, into the gathering dusk. But Larry was already far from home, somewhere above the endless canopy of the Catskill Mountains, high in the clouds where no human eye could see. The boy drifted helplessly in the iron grip of the man in black, half awake, dizzy, and terrified. Larry's little heart raced against his ribs like a trapped bird. He dared not scream. His small fingers twitched, reaching for something, anything, but there was nothing to hold on to. The wind howled around them like a choir of ghosts. The man's long, dark nails dug gently but firmly into Larry's arms, holding him effortlessly, and the boy's eyes fluttered half shut as he looked down at the forest stretching endlessly below, green waves beneath the dying light. And somewhere deep inside, Larry knew. The monster was real. The search for the boy had stretched on for days, 4 days and 4 nights without pause. His name echoed across the entire state of New York, from the sprawling Catskill Mountains to every corner of the surrounding countryside. The search was relentless, carried out by the police, sheriffs, even the FBI, and of course by family, friends, locals, hunters, and anyone else who could lend a hand. Yet, despite their efforts, there was no help to be found, no sign, no sound, nothing from the child. Timothy Shelton, a firefighter from Springstown, had been tirelessly combing through the forests with his colleagues, but it was as if the boy had vanished into thin air. On the 5th day of the search, exhausted and defeated, Timothy made the difficult decision to briefly visit his wife Harriet and his daughter Lillian, who had been grieving and hoping for the boy's safe return. After he finished the visit, he stepped out of their home, making his way toward his Ford pickup. Before he could reach the truck, a voice called out to him, soft yet urgent. He turned to see an elderly woman standing by the road. She was Native American, dressed entirely in black, her gray hair unkempt, and a simple crucifix hanging around her neck. She beckoned him to follow her, inviting him to take a walk with her in the nearby park. Without waiting for him to respond, she said, "I know where the child is." Timothy hesitated, a strange shiver running through his spine, but the words seemed to pull him in. He followed her toward the park. The trees seemed to sway unnaturally in the wind, casting long, eerie shadows that danced beneath the streetlights. The woman began to speak, her voice calm but insistent. "You are not a Christian," she said, as though it wasn't a question, but an undeniable truth. Timothy nodded, his throat tight. He had drifted away from his faith long before his son, Larry, was born. She continued, speaking of the importance of faith in Christ, her words flowing like a stream of ancient wisdom. And as they reached the park and sat down on a weathered bench, the woman grabbed Timothy's hand in a sudden firm grip. Her skin felt cold, almost lifeless, as if the warmth of the world had never touched it. "The boy is safe," she said, her voice low and filled with an unsettling certainty. "He is in an old wooden house, high up in the Catskill Mountains, waiting for you to find him. But only you. You will go, and you will take your blood, your son, and bring him back with you. God has shown mercy, and he is returning him to you. But beware, next time, he will not be returned. He will be lost, forever and ever." A chill gripped Timothy's heart as the woman's words sank into his bones. She stood abruptly, her black cloak swirling around her like a shadow, and turned to leave without another word. Timothy, heart pounding in his chest, called after her. "How will I find the house?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't turn back, but her voice drifted toward him like a fading memory. "Well, now, the Holy Spirit will guide you." Without another moment's hesitation, Timothy rushed to his truck, the urgency of her words pushing him into motion. He drove through the winding roads, the night pressing down on him, thick and oppressive. Higher and higher he climbed, until the roads disappeared, and he was forced to leave his truck behind in a secluded clearing. He entered the forest on foot, the scent of pine and damp leaves filling his nostrils as the night enveloped him. He moved without fear, though the trees seemed to whisper and groan around him, as if they were alive, watching, waiting. There was no weapon in his hand, only the raw determination that drove him deeper into the unknown. Hours passed. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the dense forest closed in around him, thick underbrush snagging at his boots and the faint rustle of unseen creatures brushing past him. His senses sharpened, the sharp smell of earth, the dampness of the air, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, the weight of the silence, broken only by the soft crunch of his footsteps. Just before dawn, as the first light of morning began to creep over the horizon, Timothy saw it. Through the trees, barely visible in the growing light, a faint glow radiated from a small weathered house. Its wooden frame seemed to sag under the weight of time, but it pulsed with an unnatural light that made Timothy squint, the brightness nearly blinding. But the air around him had changed. It grew thick with an unbearable tension. The cries, screams, moans, howls, they weren't the sounds of the forest, but something far darker, something unnatural. It wasn't the wind in the trees or the call of an animal, but something far worse. Evil, pure, unfiltered evil. Timothy's heart raced as he made his way toward the house, each step bringing him closer to the source of the torment. He found himself whispering words of prayer, his hands trembling, for the first time in years. His mind screamed for him to turn back, to run from the terror that awaited him, but his body moved of its own accord, driven by a force greater than fear, driven by love, by the hope of finding his son. As the door of the house loomed closer, the cries grew louder, the voices mingling in a cacophony of despair and fury, the darkness closing in around him. The air tasted bitter now, thick with the promise of something terrible, something ancient. Timothy stepped forward, his breath ragged, his pulse thundering in his ears. "God help me," he whispered, a prayer he had not spoken in years, the words barely escaping his cracked lips. And then, as he reached the door, the darkness seemed to open before him, and he stepped into the unknown dock. But as Timothy opened the door and stepped inside, the light abruptly stopped, as did every sound. The dawn had already broken, but within the wooden house, on the earthen floor, lay the boy, motionless, as if asleep. Timothy's heart skipped a beat as he rushed to his son, waking him gently. The child stirred, and when their eyes met, a flood of emotions overwhelmed them both. They embraced, tears streaming down their faces, their sobs filling the silent air. Timothy whispered prayers of gratitude to God, overwhelmed by the miracle he had just witnessed. Together, father and son made their way back to Springstown, their journey a testament to the strength of faith, a bond restored between parent and child. Word of the boy's return spread quickly, and soon people gathered to celebrate the news. The house, where he had been found, was said to have once belonged to an elderly Native American woman who had passed away from natural causes 25 years prior. This revelation sent a chill through Timothy, but it also deepened his faith, more than ever before. The fire of belief burned brightly within him, and it ignited the hearts of his wife, his son, and his daughter. They found solace in the love and grace that had reunited their family. The night the boy was found, after they had all come together once more, a knock echoed on their door. Timothy and Harriet exchanged wary glances, but they opened it to reveal a stranger, though something about him didn't feel like a stranger at all. The man had a handsome face, with long, slightly curly brown hair, and he wore a deep blue cloak. His presence was both calm and commanding, yet there was something ethereal about him. "I see you have found your son," the man said, his voice low and steady. "You have seen the light, and now I ask you to accept it fully. Many see, yet fail to believe, and they vanish into the darkness. So will it be for you, unless you stand with the light I offer." He introduced himself as Michael, and with a quiet nod to the Sheltons, he turned toward the door, heading back into the night. The streetlights cast their glow along the path, but before Timothy could even blink, the man simply vanished, without a trace. like mist fading into the early morning fog. The Sheltons stood in stunned silence. They knew then that they had witnessed something otherworldly. They had heard the words of a saint, and they accepted God into their lives with unwavering faith. From that moment on, they found peace, strength, and unity. Their faith had been tested, but it had also been affirmed, and they emerged stronger than ever, bound by a divine light that guided their way forward. This story is from my book, which I published on Amazon Kindle a few days ago. I'm a new author, and in the past 9 days, I have released my first 2 books, one with over 350 pages, and this second one, The Catskills Testament, which has 55 pages. The book and all its content, including this text, are protected by copyright. Meh. A message or warning about the unknown. Right as I had finally memorized and grown accustomed to the noises each step my mother and father make in our home, the night sky had decided to come forth, and the scorching sun took its ray of light and heat to slumber, and so did we. I go in my room and turn the lights off. As I was coming closer to my bed, the sound of me, my mother and father's footsteps could be heard echoing across the house. We all had gone to sleep. It was 3 a.m. That is the time when I woke up to a strange loud noise, followed by the sound of footsteps. Petrified and half awake, I stayed in bed, hiding under the sheets, ears open to hear any sound that was coming from downstairs. That is, when I realized those were not the footsteps of anyone I know. Realization hit me, followed by fear and a chilling feeling that gave me the shivers. I could hear him or her. You can't really tell who or what it was. All you could hear was its footsteps, and that it isn't Mom nor Dad. Knock knock. My eyes open wide. I am now wide awake, taking a peek from under my sheet. The sound of knocking is at my door, but who could it be? Even though the room was dark, it was almost as if you could even see the door trembling with each knock. Knock knock. That thing behind the door kept knocking. Me as I am wide awake now, cowering in fear under my sheets. Couldn't even move to answer the door. And to be honest, even if I could, I don't think I'd have the courage to. I could feel my heart sinking, my lungs breathing heavily as fear began seeping into me. Knock knock. The thing was persistent. Then I look at the time. It was an old clock that has always been in my room ever since we moved in. 3:05 a.m. I look in shock. Only 5 minutes have passed. How can this be? Knock knock. Driven by shock and frustration, I decide to accept my fate. The paralyzing fear had calmed down, still shivering from the unknown that was waiting for me behind that door. Knock knock.
I hop out of bed wearing my pajamas.
Yes, those pajamas my mom and dad bought me a couple of weeks ago. I was wondering if this is the end for me. Will I ever wear those pajamas again? My hand, cold as ice, due to loss of blood circulation in my hand, reaching out for the door handle. The cold breeze in the room from the open window. I forgot to close before I went to sleep, my eyes drifting everywhere, wondering what to do. I opened the door, and there it was, a dark humanoid figure. I was rather young, so at the time I thought it was my dad, since it looked like a man in his 30s. Foolish little me felt a sense of relief, and at the same time, buzz curiosity. Why could I not tell it was my dad? Why is he just standing there, in the darkness? Many questions, many possible answers. But one thing was clear, that thing was not my father. Little me, so young and foolish, jumps at it, joyfully yelling out, "Dad, Dad, you scared me." Alas, the thing did not respond. Instead, all I could feel was its cold body. It almost didn't even feel like a body, as it was not human, more like a manifestation, a pretender. There was no heartbeat, no breathing. Actually, it did breathe. But its lungs didn't move. It was as if looking at a deaf person who could breathe and move. Young me, at that time, had realized that was no human, or at least not one that I was familiar with, at my young age. And now that I'm older, I'm sure you and me both realize that there really are no humans like that. Shocked from what I had just witnessed, I rushed to my parents' rooms as I noticed that thing was just standing there focused on my room. Yet to my surprise, as I reached the stairs, my heart sinks to the floor and my breathing intensifies when I saw it. That thing hiding in the darkness, in the blink of an eye, turned its face towards me. Now that it was facing my direction, you could clearly see the look on its face. It had eyes, but couldn't see, or so I assume, since they were pitch black. It didn't have ears, or at least I didn't see any due to its long black hair. It was no usual hair. It looked almost like clay. It didn't have the physics of normal hair, almost as if looking at a mangled mannequin. I sprint to my parents' room. I hear the thing let out a deafening roar, sending chill down my spine. Tears begin rolling down my cheeks, but I don't stop. I can't stop. Stop running, and who knows what will happen. I could hear it, its footsteps as I ran, this time however much faster. Little me, with his tiny legs, tried the best he could to outrun it. What used to be unknown just minutes ago was now charging at me in efforts to catch me. Heavy breathing was traversing the air. Screams were echoing. Growling noises were heard. Loud footsteps. Tear marks on the ground. One little boy and an unknown trespasser, who for unknown reasons and unknown goals, wanted to catch him. There it was. The door. I could feel the sense of hope, and the numerous times I thought to myself, I can do it. I'm almost there. Mom, Dad, I'm almost there. Looking back, the thing was right behind me, glaring at me, growling, and reaching out for me. With my last strength I had left, I immediately reached out for the handle, opened the door, and closed myself inside. There I was, lying down on the ground. I could hear that thing again. Knocking. I was so tired, and so relieved that I outran it, that I had forgotten my sole reason for even coming to this room in the first place. As I was lying down, catching my breath, I noticed a musty smell in the room. Something was wrong. My parents' room has never smelled so unpleasantly before. I stood up, brushed all the dust off my so precious pajamas, although those were the least of my concerns at the moment, because right in front of me were two bodies, deformed to such unrecognizable forms that one would mistake it for a different animal. Unfortunately for me, it was clear that those two were my parents. Knock knock. The knocking sound was back, this time more aggressive than before. I panicked. What do I do? It's right there. Mom, Dad, knock knock. I start quietly sobbing, and decide that if my time has arrived, then so be it. Using my last efforts, I put my cold, shaky hand on my mouth in attempts to be quieter, close my eyes, and lie on the ground with my two parents' bodies on top of me. And then it happened. The knocking intensified, faster and louder than before, till it eventually barged in through the door. My vision was blocked. All I had was my hearing. My nose was clogged with the grim smell the bodies were letting out. Slow footsteps were approaching. All that was going through my mind was, please don't find me. Please don't find me. The thing, almost as if reading my mind, went out of the room. Next to my parents' bedroom was my dad's office. He always told me to never go in there, for unknown reasons. However, my parents' bedroom was the worst place to hide in at the moment, as it was the last location it saw me in. I crawled towards the office, holding my breath, tears and cries in. You could hear it looking for me upstairs. I gently grabbed the door, which was excruciatingly hard as I couldn't stop myself shaking in fear. The door opens. Cold breeze hits me in the face coming from inside the room. You can hear the sound of papers being blown from the wind. I go inside and use my little strength to push some old small couch to the door, in hopes to somehow block it from entering, although we all know that would never work with a small couch like that. On my dad's desk, you could see his laptop, papers, the pen he was always writing with whenever I used to come here to tell him that Mom's calling us for dinner. I miss my parents so much. I say, I have to make it out of here. I was very young. You would probably suggest to use the laptop to call for help, but we can't just assume I know the password. At the far right corner, I glimpsed a landline phone, the ones that nowadays would be called ancient. I probably got the emergency number wrong a couple of times due to panicking and being unable to keep my thoughts straight. Eventually, I dialed 911 and help was coming. The person on the other end of the line seemed very level-headed and managed to calm me down a bit as I was hiding under my dad's desk. A couple of minutes later, loud noises echoed through the walls, and for some time after that, quietness had took over the house. A moment after that, I could hear the sirens of the ambulances and the police cars coming to my home, and I decided to go out of the room and meet them at the entrance. The thing was nowhere to be found. All that was left of the scene were my parents, both gone. Me, shivering in fear, and a couple of broken furnitures. I don't know what it was, who it was, where it is, or what it wanted. All I know was that it meant no good, and even though I saw its appearance, you could say it's still unknown, as it was so unusual that you can't even describe it unless you see it for yourself. A couple of years later, I'm at my office, writing this to you. Since the only actual characters in this story are me, my parents, and you, that thing is still not found. It's lurking, possibly knocking at someone else's door right now, walking around inside someone else's home. Whatever it is, whatever it wants, do not answer the door. Don't let it know that you're in there. Last Halloween, something monstrous attacked my friends and I. It's still out there. I'm posting this story here as a last-ditch effort to prepare everyone for this year's Halloween. Before you ask, yes, I've already told my parents and the police everything about what happened last Halloween. My parents thought I was losing it, and the cops thought I was playing a bad prank. If only they were there that fateful night. That leaves this Reddit community as my only hope to warn people about the coming storm. On Halloween, something terrifying stalks the streets and picks off trick-or-treaters. Last year, my friends and I became its targets. It started out like our last 3 Halloweens at NC State. Me and my friends Alex and Will met up in my dorm, decked out in stupid costumes and ready for a fun night of drinking and free candy. This year, we all decided to dress up as James Bond and to wear purple bandanas on our heads. Don't ask me why we wore the bandanas. I couldn't tell you. Then we formulated our plan: we'd pre-game, go trick-or-treating in the nearby neighborhood, and then go clubbing. You're never too old for trick-or-treating, and you're never too buzzed either. At least, that's what we thought when we set off for the neighborhood, candy buckets in our hands and booze in our systems. Sure, we were smart enough to never drive after drinking, but we weren't smart or sober enough to watch our backs. As we walked across the moonlit campus and towards the nearby neighborhood, something malevolent was watching us. I'm sure it wasn't fun for a tired parent to see 3 college students knock on their door and yell "trick or treat" in a fake British accent. Luckily, all the houses we came across were still happy to give us candy. By the time we'd completely filled out candy buckets, it was already 10:30. The tall oak trees of the neighborhood blocked any moonlight from reaching us, keeping the whole street dark and gloomy. At that point, it was too dark out, and we felt too drunk to walk all the way to the club, so I got us an Uber. The app told me it'd arrive in 15 minutes. Looking to pass the time, me and Alex sat down on the sidewalk and began to gorge on our sugary loot. Will didn't sit down with us. Instead, he stood straight as a plank, looking down the dark road before us. "Will, you good man?" I asked. Will didn't respond. Me and Alex exchanged confused looks. Maybe Will had more to drink than we thought. Alex stood up and lightly pushed Will to get his attention. That's when Will snapped. "Don't look, I'm sorry, man, but I could have sworn someone was fucking staring at us from behind that tree." He pointed at one of the oaks about 100 feet down the road. Alex, obviously a little shaken, nervously laughed. "Chill the fuck out, man. You're just drunk. We're the only ones out here right now." No sooner did Alex finish his sentence before something darted behind that same damn tree. All the blood drained from Alex's face. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I bolted up and stood next to my 2 friends. We were all pretty athletic, and we knew how to fight, so not too much scared us. But something felt so wrong about that thing spying on us from behind that tree. It didn't feel like we were being watched by a person. It felt like we were being watched by an animal, a predator. "Here, you creep. We can see you," I shouted, hoping to draw out or scare off our stalker. "If you don't stop hiding right now, we're gonna come over there and..." Just then, it stepped out from behind the oak tree. It looked like a grandma. Imagine the most stereotypical grandma you can think of. Frizzy hair, glasses, floral dress, hunched over a cane, the full combo. All 3 of us sighed in relief. It was just some poor old woman who'd gotten lost. She began to hobble over to us, and I began to think of how to apologize. After all, this poor little lady had probably been just as scared and confused as we were. But as she got closer, I started to feel weirded out again. She was hobbling over to us way too quickly, like she didn't even need her cane. Hell, it looked like she was faking the hobble too. She also wasn't as little as I thought. Hunched, sure, but big and broad-shouldered like a goddamn linebacker. Her hair looked like a wig, and her glasses were actually just cheap sunglasses. "What the fuck?" Will muttered under his breath. In a matter of seconds, Shed covered half of the distance between us. All three of us started backing up, and then we started running. All of a sudden, she stood up straight, threw her cane down, and began to sprint. The thing charging at us was no grandma. It was a grown-ass man. He couldn't have been shorter than 65, and he looked like 300 pounds of pure muscle. His skin, if you could call it that, looked like it was made of shadows. It was black and gooey like tar, and had wisps of black and red smoke coming off of it. But the scariest part of this guy wasn't his size, his speed, or his appearance. It was the elephant trunk of a dick sticking out from beneath his fake granny dress. Despite the literal log between his legs, he caught up to us in a single second. He knocked us all to the ground one by one, and then he spoke. "My name is Big Dick Randy," he yelled. "I want your booty and your candy." He then scooped our candy buckets off the ground with his left hand and demanded that we stand up and turn away from him. Me, Alex, and Will were so scared that we complied. Big Dick Randy then let out what I can only describe as a moan before slapping our booty cheeks so hard it felt like our booties were ripped off our bones. We fell to the sidewalk in agony. Another Randy booty slap like that, and we'd be completely cooked. But just then, the street was illuminated by a pair of LED headlights. Our Uber arrived just in time. "No roo," Randy yelled. "No more booty for tonight. But next year, haha, I'll get everyone's booty and candy. Everyone's, ha 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 ha." Then the giant monster man sprinted down the street at full speed. Alex, Will, and I silently got up from the sidewalk and watched as Big Dick Randy vanished into the night, cackling all the way. Without saying a word, we got into the Uber. Our driver saw Randy too, judging from how pale his face was when we entered his Chevy Tahoe. "So, you still want a ride to the club?" Or he began. "Thanks, man, but can you just drop us off at NC State?" I replied. Of course," he quickly responded. "I think I'm gonna need the night off too after seeing that thing." When we were safely back on campus, we immediately went to the campus police to report what happened to us. Though they were seriously concerned that someone was going around slapping booties, they assumed we'd just been pranked by another drunk student and freaked out. To be fair, we all smelled like booze, sounded loopy, and looked completely out of it. We were in no state to be trusted by police who'd seen plenty of confused students like us on Halloween. We then tried calling our parents. Alex's parents accused him of being high. Will's parents accused him of being drunk, and my parents accused me of being both. In the end, Alex, Will, and I decided to just go to bed and see if we wake up with additional sober insight the next morning. Though we did wake up sober, we didn't wake up with any revelations about what we saw, or any alternate explanations as to why our booty cheeks were sore. It's been many months since that fateful night, but we still remember Big Dick Randy's warning well. He's coming back this Halloween, and he's coming to slap everyone's booty and eat everyone's candy. However, Reddit alone won't be enough to warn people about Randy's dastardly plan as such. I've taken to Spotify as well to make a song about it. Look up my name Digbar on Spotify and search for my song Big Dick Randy. Listening to it might be the only way to stay safe this Halloween. The King's Will. The orders King Dukemort had left in his will were simple. If Hermes finally comes to guide me to the deepest abyss of Hades, you four, my loyalist subordinates, are to perform a ritual, the steps of which I now bestow upon you. I entrust in you the greatest confidence, that of my life itself, a trust I refuse even my own blood. The King's Will began. King Dukemort was wise to place his trust in the four men, Jacques Benoit, Louis Fidel, Michel Confort, and Luc de Rochefort, were among the few men in the country who remained loyal to the king. His regime, often denounced as tyrannical, was tainted by blood, the blood of other nations, for his army was ruthless, but also his own. For treason he punished without mercy. His people gasped for air when his death was announced, but little did they know, King Dukemort had a plan, one that would reinstate his savage rule. Perusing antique texts, his late servant, Lucien Delacroix, had laid his grasp upon an ancient ritual. The king paid him mightily, for he had reasons to believe only this ritual would suffice. Briefly thereafter, Delacroix passed, leading King Dukemort to bestow the ritual upon the four loyal men. The king was buried on the 7th of December, year 1857. He had died a mere week before of his worsening cancer. The silence weighed heavy as the noble crowd gazed upon his casket, gently being lowered into the frozen earth, and the quiet tears of his family soaked the ground. From the nearby streets, music echoed as the plebeians celebrated their newfound freedom. In the deepest chambers of the Château de Ducmore, the 4 loyal men set to work. The damp stone walls flickered in the light of their torch as they ventured deeper. "How deep do we have to go?" Comfort asked, feeling the weight of the cold, incense-filled air. "As deep as these paths will take us, as the king ordered," Fidel answered, unable to conceal his irritation. Louis Fidel truly believed that the king would salvage his crumbling nation, more so than any of the other men. Each footstep echoed through the narrow tunnels as de Rochefort let out a faint sigh, his eyes cast down to the floor beneath him. Outside the chateau, a storm raged. Thunder roared like the wildest of eldritch beasts, and the unwavering rain hammered on the palace, demanding entry. Suddenly, Fidel stopped, his eyes drawn to the left where a large mural stretched across the wall. On its floor, a man lay dying, as an angel hovered above him, observing with a detached, almost mocking disposition, as if it could help the man but refused. Fidel pondered, why would an angel be so evil, or was it in fact Satan? The others turned to see what had captured Fidel's attention, but as they did he began walking again, as if nothing had happened. De Rochefort leaned close and whispered something to Benoit, who nodded slowly in agreement, before quickening his step. Fidel stopped once more, his jaw tightening. For a moment he remained quiet, listening to the storm before declaring, "Here we are, my fellow royalists." The 4 men glanced at each other, wrinkles forming between their eyebrows, and Fidel continued, "Confort, prepare the fire." As ordered, Confort retrieved a simple mat from his bag, spread it over the cold, wet floor, and then carefully spread the kindling atop it. "Light it." Fidel's command echoed through the desolate chamber. A shiver ran down Confort's spine as he struck a match, its coarse scratch preluding the sudden flame. The 4 men held their breaths as Confort tossed the match onto the kindle, and it erupted into an unnaturally massive flame. Fidel's grip on the torch tightened, his trembling voice reverberating through the chamber. "Benoit, the blood." Benoit shakily retrieved a small vial containing King Ducmort's blood. As he opened it, a drop flew from the vial, landing on the floor with a wet, unnerving splat. He swallowed hard as he held the vial above the fire. "Do it," Fidel ordered, as Benoit poured the blood into the raging fire. The flames grew even larger, as if reaching for the blood before it landed, and hissed at the 4 men. A grin spread across Fidel's face, while Confort looked across the room, unsure. Benoit and de Rochefort remained steady, neutral. The hissing slowly concretized into a palpable voice, as the fire slowly took on the color of the king's blood. "My loyal servants, thank you for coming this far." King Ducmort's voice echoed, deep, distorted, as if he spoke from Hades itself. Fidel let out an unwilling euphoric laugh, and the king continued, "Sadly, I am not yet resurrected. There is one step left which I did not write down." The dark red fire roared, almost reaching the roof of the chamber. All the men but Fidel trembled in fear, while Confort took deep breaths, the room spinning out of his control. The 3 sane men stepped away from the fire, avoiding its unbearable heat, the air before them blurring. "What must we do, King?" Fidel enthusiastically asked, sweat running down his face. The fire calmed, before erupting once again, the king's voice filling the room. "In the bottom of your bag, there's a dagger." Fidel stopped in place, and the others looked at him. A chill swept through them, despite the burning heat, as if the king had frozen their very souls. "A dagger," Confort pathetically whispered. Fidel carefully laid the torch against the floor, a bloody light illuminating the walls, before his hands sunk into the bag. His arms halted, as if they had found something, but for a moment he remained silent. "I found it, my king," he eventually said, the fire absorbing his voice. "Excellent, my loyalist of servants." The king's voice quelled all other sounds, even that of the raging storm. He continued, "The last step, you must prove your loyalty to me." "How, King Ducmort?" Fidel asked, but the king interrupted him. "You must end your life with that dagger." The voice faded, and an infinite silence filled the room. Videl froze in shock and fear. Had the king misspoke? He held the dagger out before him, the red, ominous light reflecting off of its blade. Ukmort was carved into it. He carefully observed it and swallowed hard, hesitant. "I will do what I must," he weakly proclaimed, yet he remained still. "Don't do it," Comfort pleaded in an attempt to save his friend, but de Rochefort hushed him. "Is there no other way, King?" he asked, as composed as he could, but his fear was obvious. "There is no other way," the king answered, his voice mighty with finality. Fidel stared at the dagger, his disposition bleak. He knew what he must do. His country needed its king. His hands clasped the dagger, sweaty, shaking frantically. Could he really take his own life? The king trusted him, but why did it have to be him? Was death the reward for his loyalty? He held the dagger before his chest, but lowered it. The fire roared again. Fidel jumped and lifted the dagger again, prepared to finish the ritual. The Nord's scream interrupted him. "Don't. I'll take your place. Please. You have a family. I don't. They're all dead. I have nothing left. Let me help this country," he pleaded, his voice cracking, tears welling up in his eyes. But Fidel had already decided. "Sorry, my friends." "For the king," he said, almost whispering. The three men watched in fear, trembling violently. Tears ran down Benor's face, as he accepted he could do nothing. Even if he tried, what would the king do to him then? Fidel took 3 deep breaths. His hands felt unbearably cold against the handle, and tears welled up in his eyes. Even if his family wouldn't understand, this was for their best. The king would bring peace to the nation. Right. Fidel cleared his thoughts. For the country. For the king. With proud hands, Fidel plunged the dagger into his chest. His flesh caved with a mushy sound, and blood sprayed the chamber as manic laughter emanated from the raging fire. The fire thrived. As Fidel's body fell to the ground with a blunt thud, the 3 men screamed in desperation. The flame changed directions, and with the sound of frenzied winds surged into the hole in Fidel's chest. It filled his body, flowed through his veins, and consumed his soul. Comfort and de Rochefort exchanged a desperate, hopeless look that said one thing: "We're going to die here." The 3 men closed their eyes in fear, crying like mothers mourning their children. The sound of skin tearing and bones shattering filled the room, like a butcher separating slabs of meat. Between guttural sobs, de Rochefort opened his eyes to a horrid sight. Kians ripped open Fidel's ribcage from the inside, like a child tearing open a present, slowly clawing their way out. King Dukmort rose from Fidel's hollowed corpse, drenched in blood and intestines, as the fire suddenly died. Elgnarts. It was something of an open secret in my family. A secret that could get you killed if you weren't prepared. In my family, there are always very specific rules about certain things. We cut our meat very small. We don't drink too fast. We don't go into water deeper than our waist, and we don't put our face in the water when we do. It's something you come to understand pretty quickly, or you don't live very long. I remember losing breath for the first time when I was 6, and it scared the hell out of me. It was a simple thing, but those are usually the things that trip us up. I had been out playing in the yard, the July heat beating down on me, and I was sweating profusely as I came pelting up to the hosepipe by the house. I should have gone inside to get my drink. Mom had told me that 1,000 times, but I was so thirsty. The water was cold and nice at first, running down my face as I took a long drink. I was guzzling before I knew it, drinking like a dog as my tongue stuck out, and that was when it happened. Suddenly I was coughing and gagging, but the more I coughed, the harder it became to breathe. It wasn't like I couldn't catch my breath. It felt like someone had their hands around my throat and they were choking the life out of me. I was scared. A child of 6 isn't supposed to be scared like that, and as the little black spots started appearing in front of my eyes, I started to see something. It was like looking at a photo-negative person. An outline made real. It had long, spindly fingers, 3 times as long as a normal person's, and it had them wrapped around my neck as it throttled me. All I could do was look up at it, watching as it shook me slowly and firmly by the throat. I was blacking out, slowly dying in the clutches of this monster. But that's when I heard someone screaming from behind me. "Elgnarts! Elgnarts!" Just as quickly as it appeared, the creature was gone again. It had broken apart like smoke on a breeze, and my mother was holding me as I lay in her arms. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I told you to be careful. You always have to be careful. The Elgnarts is always waiting to get you." Back then, I didn't even think to ask her what this creature was. I was a child, and children believe in monsters. We don't question whether there are monsters or not. We question when they will come for us, and if we will be prepared. My mother had saved me, but she had also taught me how to save myself. I was lucky that day. Some members of my family were not so lucky when the Elgnarts comes for them. Despite the curse that follows us, I had a few siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, neither of whom made it to adulthood. I had 2 older siblings, Sam and Gabriel, and 2 younger siblings, Nikki and Matthew, a boy and a girl of each. I was what you would call a middle child, but I wouldn't be for long. Their deaths were too much for my father. He died before I finished high school, but my mother lived on. It was like she would not allow herself to die, knowing that she had to protect her children, then just her child, me. My sister was the first to go. She was older than me, 2 years older, and we often played together. I don't think she believed in this creature, but she had always been lucky. She didn't have a chance to see it like I did, but when I was 8 and she was 10, she died very suddenly. I'm not sure if she believed then, but I believe that she saw the Elgnarts before she went. Mom was busy that day. My baby brother was less than a year old, and he needed a lot of care. My sister and I were home. My older brother was out with friends, and my younger sister was at an aunt's house with her daughter for a play date, and we were sitting around the house being bored. We were watching cartoons, lying on the couch, when we heard a sound that all children hope for. It was the gentle music of an ice cream truck. We both got excited, running to our rooms to get our money, and we were out the door before our mother could even think to stop us. She was in the back, trying to get Matthew to sleep, and when the truck pulled up to the curb, we made our orders. Gabby got a bomb pop, and I got a Choco Crunch. I was eating slowly, taking my time as mother had taught us, but Gabby was excited. She had wanted a bomb pop all summer, but the ice cream truck didn't come down here very often. She was practically dancing on the sidewalk, dropping the wrapper beside the curb as the truck drove slowly up the road and away from us. She took a big bite, getting almost the entire tip of the bomb pop in one giant chomp, and I saw as her throat worked in an attempt to get it all down. She wheezed, her air cutting off as the ice cream bulged her throat. I got scared, watching her hands scrabble at his throat as she tried to breathe, and as her eyes got wide, I saw something in them that made me remember that day 2 years before. She was seeing it, the Elgnarts, and it was proving itself much more lively than she had believed it could be. I couldn't see it, but I watched as something took hold of her throat. It pressed the sides of her neck, breaking the ice cream, and sending it sliding down even as her windpipe was closed off by those treacherous fingers. A paramedic would later claim that the ice cream must have melted enough to slide down the rest of the way, but I knew what I had seen. I had seen those fingers as they made indentions in her throat. I had seen her look of terror as it killed her. I stood there, fear gripping me like those fingers, and tried to make my lips speak its name. That's where my mother found us, my still trying to speak, and Gabriel already dead in the street. I never forgot that day, the day I watched my sister die, and it was something that stuck with me for the rest of my life. Sam went next, but it wasn't entirely due to his lack of caution. Sam, like me, had experienced something at a very young age, and he had seen the Elgnarts before our mother had made it go away. It had made him incredibly cautious. Sam didn't take chances. He cut his meat fine enough to eat without teeth. He drank most liquids with a straw, and he never took a bite big enough to choke him. He took showers. He didn't go into water that went over his knee, and he didn't put his face into any water. No, what killed Sam was his work ethic. He was 4 years older than me, and when I was 12 he got a job. He worked nights, wanting to buy a car, and he worked almost every day after school. He was coming home on his bike one night, going over the bridge that would take him into the residential area where we lived when a drunk driver came over the bridge and hit him. He fell off his bike, flying over the side of the bridge and into the water. The water there wasn't deep. It was barely 4 feet, but when they pulled him out of the water, the coroner was puzzled. I know he must have drowned, but it almost appears that he was strangled. He had shown Mother the bruises, and though she said that sounded dreadful, I could see in her eyes that she knew. I was 12 when she took me aside and told me that I was the oldest now. Your younger siblings need you now more than ever. Never forget that it is up to you to keep an eye on them, to keep them safe from the Elgnarts before he strikes again. That's just a story, I blurted before I could think better of it. My mother shook her head at me. If you believe that, then I'll be having this discussion with your younger sister soon. You know better. You watched it kill Gabby, and you saw it when it tried to kill you. Believe in this, and be cautious in everything you do. But why? I asked. Why does it follow us? It has always followed the members of my side of the family. It's what killed your grandfather, 2 of your aunts, and both of your uncles. It nearly killed your aunt Stacy, but I stopped it. It has followed us since the old country, ever since your great-great-great-grandfather did something unforgivable. We were sitting in the living room after Sam's funeral, still dressed in our Sunday best, and it occurred to me that this was the same room Gabby and I were sitting in when we heard the ice cream truck. That seemed like 1,000,000 years ago, not just 4, and I felt an odd sense of vertigo as I thought about it. Your thrice-great-grandfather was a lumberman in Russia. He was respected. He was a pillar of the community. But the one thing he wanted was beyond his reach. He desired a woman who would not have him. He became desperate, so he went to speak with a bruja, a witch, that lived on the outskirts of the village. He told the witch what he wanted, and she told him the price would be steep. He was a man of means, and he paid what she asked. She gave him potions and charms, and spoke the words of mysticism, but none of it worked. The woman spurned his advances, and when he told the witch, she shook her head and said, "Then it is not meant to be. If your stars cannot be entangled, then they cannot. There is nothing to be done about it." He became irate, telling her that she would give him his money back if she couldn't get him what he wanted. She told him that could not be, that he had paid and taken his chances. Your great-great-great-grandfather became irate, and what he did next could not be taken back. He leapt across her table, knocking her crystals and baubles to the ground, and wrapped his fingers around her throat. He throttled her right there at her table, watching her face purpling, but the witch was not done yet. They say her lips never stopped moving, even as he strangled the life from her, and though he could not hear her words, he would remember them later. Elgnarts, Elgnarts, Elgnarts. She repeated it again and again, and even as he strangled the life from her, he felt his own throat closing a little as the rage took him. When he finished, he let go of her and stepped back. He realized what he had done, and he sure was sorry, but there was no taking it back. Unknown to him, the witch had thrown her death curse on him, and it followed his bloodline for the rest of time. The Elgnarts follows us now, just waiting for the opportunity to squash us. It killed all but one of your great-great-great-grandfather's children, and your great-great-grandfather's children, and so on and so forth. It would have left only me, I suppose, but I saved your aunt and have kept a close eye on her. I told her husband about the legend, and now he watches her so I don't have to. That's why you have to help me watch your siblings, so it doesn't happen to them. And so I did. I watched over Nikki and Matthew like they were made of glass, and that's why they nearly made it to adulthood. Matthew was 4 years younger than me, Nikki too, and it was strange to think of what they might get up to if given the opportunity. It didn't matter. I watched them like a hawk. I hovered over them ceaselessly, and though I think they resented it, they also understood. I stopped Matthew from choking on spaghetti when he was 9. I stopped Nikki from drowning in the kiddie pool when she was 11. I stopped Matthew from choking on a soda when he was 12. I stopped Nikki from choking on ice when she was 13. It was a full-time job, but thinking of Gabby made it easier. I had to save them, like I should have saved her, and it worked until Nikki suddenly went off script. She wanted to go to the beach with her class in the 10th grade. Nikki, I don't think it's a good idea. I was 20 then, still living at home and watching after them. Nikki was 16 and Matthew was 14, and Dad had been dead for nearly 3 years. It was a heart attack. There had been a close call with Nikki. She had nearly died after an incident with an allergic reaction to cigarette smoke. He had collapsed during it and never gotten up again. After that, I was even more attentive, watching for Dad and me, and this seemed like just the chance that the Elgnarts had been looking for. Well, I'm tired of never doing anything fun. I want to live a little. I'll be fine. Don't worry so much. Well, what if I chaperoned the trip? What if I... No, she said. But she said it gently. I have to be responsible for myself sometimes. even if it's just for a little while. My mother and I tried to talk sense into her, but she wouldn't listen. I went anyway, watching with binoculars from my car, but I was too late to save her. She washed up an hour after the riptide got her, and then it was just me and Matthew. Matthew almost made it. He was so close, 17, and on the cusp of graduation. He had become like Sam, careful in the extreme. He saw the writing on the wall, had seen the Elgnarts more times than he could count, and intended to beat the odds. He went nowhere. He came straight home, and he seemed to be certain that if he could make it to adulthood, he might beat the odds. He was sure of it, and as his 18th birthday approached, I kept an extra close eye on him. He was never far from my sight. We went everywhere together, and Mom commended me for my determination. I had failed Mickey. I would not fail Matt. In the end, I never had a chance. We were watching TV, something mindless, when Matt got up and went to the bathroom. I got up too, but he shook his head, saying he would only be gone for a second. He just needed to pee. It wasn't life-threatening. He went to the hall bathroom, and a moment later, I heard the toilet flush. I heard the water come on. I heard it go off, and then I heard a thump that had me running right away. He was sprawled on the ground, clutching his throat and gasping for air. Elgnarts, 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 I cried, not wasting time looking for fingers, as I acted quickly. Nothing happened. Elgnarts, 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 I cried again, but still nothing. I called for Mom, but she was out back hanging laundry and wouldn't discover that her youngest was dead until it was too late. I tried CPR, but his chest wouldn't rise. I checked for finger marks, but there were none. Nothing was squeezing his neck. I would later find out. What had happened was just bad luck. He had slipped on a floor mat and hit his throat just right, so that his windpipe was crushed. It was a 1 in a million injury, but it didn't stop the family curse from being fulfilled. So, I stood there and held his hand, being with him as he died. He was scared. God, he was scared. But I gave him all the love and all the support I could as he passed on. After that, it was just Mom and I. But I've decided that it ends with us. I'm scheduled for a vasectomy next month. I do not intend to have children that I will then have to watch die. Mom didn't understand. She was furious at first, but I think now she gets it. If I never procreate, then the curse ends with me. If I have to remain celibacy or become a priest or something, that's what I'll do. Either way, there will never be another target for the Elgnarts. And so he will strangle out as he has strangled out my bloodline. It seems the least I can do to honor the siblings I couldn't save. I was forced to work for a secret organization. What we found in Sublevel 6 will haunt me until I die. Around the 1950s, interdimensional rifts began appearing across the world. At first they seemed harmless, mere anomalies in space that had no visible impact on our reality. However, nearly a decade later, strange occurrences began. Objects started disappearing and reappearing minutes later. At first it was insignificant things, keys, books, cutlery, but as time passed, the scale of these anomalies escalated. Larger objects vanished without explanation. Then people began to disappear. At first, those who went missing would return after a short time, seemingly unharmed, but with no memory of what had happened. But as the years went on, the disappearances grew longer. Days, weeks, even months. Most of the returnees had no recollection of where they had been, as if time itself had erased their experiences. However, a few unfortunate individuals did remember, and what they described left them deeply traumatized. They spoke of incomprehensible landscapes, of being watched by something unseen, of hearing whispers in languages no human had ever spoken. Some returned in far worse conditions, missing limbs, their bodies bearing impossible wounds. What was most disturbing was that these injuries showed signs of advanced healing, as though they had been missing for years despite the person being gone only a short while. The medical impossibility of this suggested one terrifying conclusion: wherever they had gone, time moved at a drastically different rate than our own. As these incidents became more frequent and more disturbing, governments and scientific institutions scrambled for answers. In response, a secret organization was formed to study, and if possible, contain these anomalies. This organization became known as the Walker Foundation, named after its founder, the late Dr. Walker. Now, You may be wondering why I'm telling you all this. Well, I was a researcher for the Foundation, stationed at Phoenix Ridge Institute, the very heart of their operations, the mother base of all research into these phenomena. I had graduated at the top of my class at Harvard, with a degree in quantum theory. My theories on interdimensional physics had gained some traction in certain academic circles, but apparently, they also caught the attention of the Foundation. I would love to say that when they offered me a position, I had the freedom to decline, but that wasn't the case. If I recall correctly, their exact words were, "Due to your knowledge of the anomalies, you have two choices, work for us, or go 6 feet under." So, as you can imagine, I didn't have much of a choice. Now, what I'm about to tell you is technically classified information, but considering that I'm currently bleeding out, I might as well not die for nothing. Someone needs to know what happened. Someone needs to understand what came through the rift and why it must never happen again. It all started a few months after I began working at the Institute. By then, I had settled into the routine, grown accustomed to the endless security clearances, the sleepless nights spent analyzing data, and the unsettling hum of machines scanning things that shouldn't exist. Despite the secrecy and the ever-present feeling that we were meddling in forces far beyond our comprehension, Phoenix Ridge had started to feel like a second home. And I had even made a friend. I still remember the first day we met. It was during lunch, and I was sitting alone in the courtyard, absent-mindedly picking at the food on my tray. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and sterilized metal, the kind of artificial cleanliness that never quite masked the deeper sense of decay. I had barely taken a bite when I heard someone pull up a chair beside me. "They threatened to kill you too, huh?" I blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness of his words. For a second, I just stared at him, trying to gauge whether he was joking. He wasn't. There was something in his expression, an understanding, a shared weight that told me he already knew my answer. I exhaled, giving a dry, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, gotta love a job offer you can't refuse." Mark smirked and sat down across from me, setting his tray down with a clatter. "Welcome to the club then." The press ganged into Top Secret Science Society. Perks include constant surveillance, ethically questionable experiments, and the ever-present possibility of being retired if you learn too much. I stabbed at my food with a fork, suddenly not feeling very hungry. "Sounds like a dream." "Oh, it gets better," Mark said, lowering his voice. "Wait until you see what they're hiding in Sublevel 6. Phoenix Ridge sat perched on a mountain, nestled deep within an expanse of dense, untamed wilderness. There wasn't a single sign of civilization for miles. No towns, no roads, nothing but towering evergreens and jagged rock formations stretching endlessly into the horizon. The perfect place for a top-secret organization that no one needed to know existed. On the surface, it looked unassuming, a simple, sterile-looking research facility with little more than a few hangars, administrative buildings, and the occasional armed patrol. But that was just the facade. The real Phoenix Ridge wasn't above ground. It was buried deep within the mountain, descending into the very crust of the earth, like a subterranean labyrinth of reinforced steel and concrete. The deeper you went, the more restricted things became. Security checkpoints, biometric scans, armed guards at every turn. Each level housed secrets more dangerous than the last. My clearance only allowed me access up to Sublevel 5, where research teams studied anomalies in controlled environments. Beyond that, I had no idea. Anything past Sublevel 5 wasn't just restricted, it didn't officially exist. At least, that's what I thought. Somehow, Mark had managed to get his hands on a Sublevel 6 access card. I never asked how. Some things were better left unknown. "It'll be fine," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights. He flashed me a grin, though there was a nervous edge to it. "As long as we go between guard shifts, they won't catch us." I swallowed hard, glancing down at the stolen access card in his hand. It felt heavier than it should. "And if they do?" I asked. Mark smirked. "Then we run like hell." So we did it. We went down to Sublevel 6. It was surprising how easy it was. Too easy. Mark and I expected resistance, security patrols, automated defenses, something to stop us from going where we weren't supposed to. But there was nothing. Just an open corridor, dimly lit by flickering fluorescence, stretching into the depths of Phoenix Ridge. No cameras followed us. No alarms blared. It felt like we had walked into a place long since abandoned. If only I had taken that emptiness more seriously. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing against the cold metal floor. The silence was unnatural, sterile and absolute, as if the entire level had been sealed away from the rest of the world. Then came the smell. Thick, coppery, the scent of blood. Mark's grip on the stolen access card tightened. He gestured toward a set of reinforced doors ahead, marked with bold red warnings. Biological hazard. Level 6 clearance required. Authorized personnel only. This has to be it, Mark whispered. I didn't want to go in. Every nerve in my body told me that whatever had been locked away behind those doors should stay locked away. But Mark had already swiped the card. The scanner flickered green. The doors groaned open. A wave of thick, damp air rushed out, heavy with decay. I gagged, my stomach twisting at the stench. Mark covered his nose with his sleeve, his face pale. We stepped inside. The chamber was massive, stretching into darkness beyond the reach of the overhead lights. Reinforced glass containment units lined the walls, their interiors clouded with frost. Some were still sealed, others were shattered. Thick cracks, spider webbing across the glass, dark stains pooling beneath them. And then there were the handprints. Everywhere, smeared across the walls, trailing down the floor. Some were human, others had too many fingers. Mark took a slow step forward. Jesus, he muttered. What the hell happened here? Then we heard it. A sound like wet fabric sliding across metal. Something moving in the dark. Slow. Methodical. A dragging sound. Mark and I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. The noise was coming from the far end of the chamber, past the broken containment units, past the streaks of dried blood. Then it came into view. A figure. Humanoid, but wrong. Its skin was stretched taut, sickly pale beneath the dim lights. Its arms were too long, its fingers gnarled and stiff. The way it moved was unsettling. Its legs bent at unnatural angles, yet it carried itself with an eerie, effortless grace. But it was the body it dragged that made my stomach lurch. The corpse was massive, easily twice the creature's size. A man in a tattered lab coat, his arms limp, his skull caved in. A body that should have been too heavy for something so thin, so frail looking. Yet the thing pulled it with ease, like it weighed nothing at all. Mark inhaled sharply.
We need to.
The thing dropped the body and started moving. Fast. Mark barely had time to finish his sentence before the thing lunged. It didn't move like something that had learned to walk. It moved like something that had learned to chase. Its limbs jerked unnaturally, snapping into place like a puppet on tangled strings. But its speed was terrifying. The moment it dropped the body, it closed half the distance between us in seconds. Mark grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. Run. We bolted. Our boots pounded against the floor. Our breath ragged. The door was still open. If we could just reach it. A sharp clang rang out behind us. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The thing had hit the ground, not tripped, not collapsed. It had just dropped, like its legs had suddenly given out. Its arms twitched, its fingers flexing against the floor, nails scraping against the metal. Then it started to rise. Not like a person getting up. Like something being pulled upright by invisible strings. I felt bile rise in my throat. The way its joints twisted, the way its body convulsed. It was like it didn't have full control over itself. Like it wasn't meant to be moving at all. Yet it was. And it was getting faster. Mark made it to the doorway first. He slammed his hand against the panel. The door hesitated. Just a second, but a second too long. The thing let out a sound. Not a scream, not a growl. A deep, guttural clicking, like bones snapping over and over again in its throat. And then it jumped. I barely dove through the doorway in time. Mark hit the override panel on the other side, and the metal doors slammed shut just as the creature collided with them. The impact shook the walls. A second later, something scraped against the metal. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging along the surface. Then, silence. I slumped against the opposite wall, chest heaving. Mark was beside me, hands shaking. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Neither of us could. Then Mark turned to me, his face pale. "We need to get the hell out of here." I nodded, forcing myself to stand. "Yeah, but first," I glanced at the terminal near the door. It had a security log. I swiped the screen, scrolling back to the last recorded entries. My stomach dropped. The logs ended 3 weeks ago, and the last recorded entry was from Dr. Adams. Log 4. Sebastian really messed up. I told him the rift was too unstable, that it needed to be contained. But he wouldn't listen. He never listened. And now, because of his arrogance, I'm watching that stubborn fool being torn apart. His screams won't stop. I can hear the wet crunch of bone, the tearing of flesh, the thing's guttural growls between bites. I should look away, but I can't. I know I'm next. Whoever is reading this, listen to me carefully. Run. Run as fast as you can. That thing cannot be killed. We tried. God knows we tried. Bullets, fire, electric surges. It only seemed to amuse it, and it's hungry. If my calculations are correct, it has enough food down here to last 3 weeks. After that, when the bodies are gone, it will start hunting. It will need to hunt. And if you're anywhere nearby when that happens, you won't have time to react. We should have killed it the moment we had the chance. Why do we always choose research over survival? Why do we insist on understanding what only wants to consume us? This entity, it's classified as a beta, and we've only ever documented 2 betas since the Foundation was established. The first wiped out an entire containment facility before we could even classify its behavior. This one might be worse. The others are gone. The doors won't hold. And I can hear it moving again. The crunching stopped. Oh God, it's done eating. End of log. Mark and I didn't waste another second. The scraping sound against the door had stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like the calm before a storm, like the thing on the other side was waiting, calculating. I didn't want to find out what it was planning. "We need to get to the surface," Mark said, his voice low but urgent. "If that thing gets out of Sublevel 6, the whole facility is done for." I nodded, my mind racing. The security logs had mentioned that the entity had enough food to last 3 weeks. If the logs ended 3 weeks ago, that meant it was out of food. And if it was out of food, it would start hunting. We were the closest prey. We moved quickly but quietly, retracing our steps through the dimly lit corridors. The air felt heavier now, charged with a tension that made every sound, every creak of metal, every hum of machinery, feel like a warning. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could see the same fear reflected in Mark's eyes. As we reached the elevator, Mark swiped his stolen access card. The doors slid open with a soft ding, and we stepped inside. I hit the button for Sublevel 1, the surface level, but the elevator didn't move. Instead, the lights flickered, and a cold draft seeped through the cracks in the doors. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, jabbing the button again. The elevator shuddered, and for a moment I thought it was going to work, but then the lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. The emergency lights flickered on a second later, casting an eerie red glow over the small space. "We're not alone," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mark didn't respond, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, clicking it on. The beam of light cut through the red haze, but it did little to ease the growing sense of dread. The elevator jerked suddenly, and we both stumbled. The doors creaked open, but we weren't on Sublevel 1. We were somewhere deeper, somewhere we hadn't been before. The corridor beyond was dark, the walls lined with pipes and wires that hissed and sparked. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay, and the floor was slick with something I didn't want to identify. Mark shone the flashlight down the corridor, revealing a series of doors, each marked with the same red warnings we'd seen on Sublevel 6. "This isn't right," Mark said, his voice tight. "We didn't go down. We should be going up." I didn't have an answer. The elevator had taken us somewhere it wasn't supposed to, and I had a sinking feeling that it wasn't a malfunction. Something had brought us here. We stepped out of the elevator cautiously, the doors sliding shut behind us with a finality that made my stomach churn. The corridor stretched ahead, disappearing into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a sound, a low guttural growl that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to move," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded, and we started down the corridor, the beam of the flashlight, our only guide. The doors we passed were all sealed, their warning labels faded and peeling. Some of them had handprints, human and otherwise, smudged across the glass. Then we heard it. The sound of something moving, dragging itself across the floor. It was close, too close. Mark swung the flashlight around, and the beam caught something in the shadows. A figure, hunched and twisted, its two long limbs splayed at unnatural angles. It was the beta entity. It turned its head slowly, its eyes reflecting the light like a predator's. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out that same guttural clicking sound we'd heard before. "Run!" Mark shouted, and we took off down the corridor. The thing was fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It moved like a spider, its limbs skittering across the walls and ceiling as it chased us. I could hear it gaining on us, the sound of its claws scraping against metal growing louder with every second. We rounded a corner, and Mark slammed his hand against a control panel. A door slid open, and we dove through, the door slamming shut behind us. The thing hit the door with a force that shook the walls, and I heard the sound of claws digging into metal. "This way," Mark said, pulling me down another corridor. We ran until we reached a stairwell, the door marked with a sign that read "Surface Access." Mark yanked the door open, and we started up the stairs, taking them two at a time. The sound of the beta entity faded behind us, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was still out there, hunting. When we finally reached the surface, the cold night air hit me like a slap. The stars were bright overhead, and the moon cast a pale light over the facility, but there was no time to appreciate the view. We needed to get as far away from Phoenix Ridge as possible. Mark led the way to a parked jeep near the entrance. He jumped into the driver's seat, and I climbed in beside him. The engine roared to life, and we sped down the mountain road, the facility disappearing behind us in a cloud of dust. For a moment, I thought we might actually make it. Then the jeep lurched violently, and the world spun. I barely had time to register what was happening before we crashed into a tree, the impact throwing me against the dashboard. Pain shot through my side, and I tasted blood in my mouth. I looked over at Mark. He was slumped against the steering wheel, blood trickling down his face. "Mark!" I shouted, shaking him. "Wake up." He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Go," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "You need to go." "Not without you," I said, trying to pull him out of the jeep. But he pushed me away, his strength surprising me. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "That thing is still out there. It's not going to stop. You need to warn people. You need to tell them what's happening." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I can't do this alone." Mark grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You're not alone. You've got the logs. You've got the truth. Now go." I hesitated, but the sound of something moving in the trees made my blood run cold. The beta entity was close. Too close. Mark shoved me again, harder this time. "Go," he shouted. I stumbled back, my heart breaking as I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I heard the sound of the beta entity closing in, and I heard Mark's final, defiant shout. Then there was silence. I don't have much time. I can feel the blood pooling beneath me, the cold seeping into my bones. My vision is blurring, and every breath feels like a struggle. But I need to finish this. I need to tell you what happened. Someone has to know. Mark is gone. He didn't make it. We crashed the jeep trying to escape, and he stayed behind to buy me time. I don't know if it was enough. I don't know if I'm far enough away, but I can still hear it. The clicking, the scraping, the sound of something moving in the shadows. It's out there, and it's coming. I managed to send some of the logs before the crash. I don't know if they'll go through. The signal out here is spotty at best, and I don't even know who I sent them to. But if you're reading this, if you've seen the files, you need to listen. The Walker Foundation isn't what they say they are. They've been lying to everyone. The rifts, the entities, the experiments, it's all real, and it's worse than anyone could imagine. The thing we saw in Sublevel 6, it's not human. It's not even from this world. It's something else, something that doesn't belong here. and it's not the only one. There are others. The Foundation has been studying them, trying to control them, but they don't understand what they're dealing with. These things, they're not just dangerous, they're wrong, they don't follow the rules of our reality. They don't think like we do, and they're hungry. I don't know how much longer I have. The pain is getting worse, and I can't feel my legs anymore. But I need to warn you, if you're near Phoenix Ridge, if you hear about strange disappearances or unexplained phenomena, run. Don't try to investigate. Don't try to help. Just get as far away as you can. And if you work for the Foundation, if you're reading this and you know what I'm talking about, you need to stop. Whatever they've told you, whatever they've promised you, it's not worth it. The things they're doing, they're playing with forces they can't control. And when it all goes wrong, and it will go wrong, there won't be anyone left to clean up the mess. I can hear it now. It's closer. The clicking, the scraping, it's right outside. I don't have much time. Please, if you're reading this, don't let this happen again. Don't let them keep lying. Don't let them keep experimenting. The rifts are real. The entities are real. And if we're not careful, they're going to destroy everything. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I'm sorry I couldn't stop it. It's here. The Puppeteer. Sarah Mitchell had always considered her husband, Agent David Mitchell, to be a man of order, intellect, and reason. His world was one of clear-cut facts, analyzed evidence, and unshakable logic. There was a comfort in that, in the way he could always separate emotion from investigation, shield them both from the chaos his work often entailed. So, when she discovered an unmarked file, tucked away in his office drawer one evening, a file he had never mentioned, she was intrigued. The file's surface was worn, the manila edges frayed, as though it had passed through countless hands before finding its way to her. The label, in faded black ink, read, RE101, The Puppeteer. It was a title that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine, though she couldn't yet explain why. Curiosity tugged at her like a child pulling on a sleeve, and Sarah, usually cautious, couldn't resist. She opened the folder. At first glance, it looked like just another case file, testimonies, photographs, surveillance reports, nothing she hadn't seen. David sifted through countless times before, yet something was different. A palpable heaviness filled the air as her eyes began scanning the contents. The first document was a brief report on a nameless victim, the identification redacted. What struck Sarah immediately was the way the incident was described. The victim had discovered an old photograph in a forgotten trunk in the attic of their childhood home. In the faded sepia image, a man stood with a puppet dangling from strings in his hand, but the puppet was not what had disturbed them. It was the man. His face was a smudged, indistinct blur, as though someone had intentionally obscured it from view. It was the kind of blur that didn't make sense in an old photograph. The face wasn't out of focus. It was deliberately hidden, as if a dark cloud of ink had seeped into the paper itself, making the figure seem both part of the image and not. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she continued reading. What had begun as a simple discovery quickly descended into a waking nightmare. The nameless victim had reported that the photograph seemed to change every time they looked at it. At first it was subtle, just a shift in the light or the puppet's angle. But soon the puppet appeared to move on its own, its position different each time they returned to the image. Then came the hallucinations, dark, distorted figures seen in the corners of their vision, voices in the dead of night, whispers they couldn't quite decipher, and the dreams of strings attached to their limbs, pulling them in unnatural, jerking movements, as though they had become a marionette in the hands of some unseen master. The report ended abruptly. No conclusion, no final notes, just a single cryptic sentence. Victim is no longer responsive. Sarah's fingers trembled as she flipped the page. Her eyes found the next entry. Another victim, a young woman this time. Similar circumstances. She had found a drawing of a puppet, half torn and crumpled inside an old bookshed purchased at a flea market. Like the first victim, it began with strange occurrences, items in her apartment shifting positions, shadows that didn't belong to anyone. And always, the puppet, its twisted wooden limbs and painted eyes staring, unblinking. The nightmares came next. The woman had described the sensation of being controlled, her body moving against her will. She awoke with bruises around her wrists and ankles, deep, purple marks that resembled the impression of tightly pulled strings. As Sarah read, her chest tightened. This was no ordinary case. It was as though the entity, whatever it was, thrived on more than just fear. It fed on control, on the act of manipulating its victims until they were no longer their own. Each case followed the same eerie pattern. First contact with an image, whether a photograph, drawing, or even a sculpture, triggered the descent, and once the victim was touched by the puppeteer's influence, there was no escape. Sarah felt a growing unease settle in her stomach. The room had become noticeably colder. She glanced at the window. It was closed. She hadn't noticed before how still the house was. No hum of the refrigerator, no distant murmur of the TV, nothing but the sound of her own shallow breathing. She reached the last few pages of the file. One final report caught her attention. This victim was different, not just a random bystander, but an investigator, a seasoned agent working for a covert agency known as the APE, the Apocalypse Prevention Enterprise. The agent's testimony was more detailed than the others, filled with clinical observations. They had been assigned to investigate the origins of the Puppeteer case, after several unexplained disappearances. The agent's notes were meticulous, charting their own mental unraveling as they dug deeper. They had obtained a photograph, much like the others, and described feeling drawn to it, as if something beyond their understanding had compelled them to stare. Soon they too began to suffer the symptoms, hallucinations, insomnia, the feeling of being watched by something unseen. But unlike the others, they had one final observation. The entity is not bound to the image itself. It transcends it. It enters through the mind. Once you've seen it, once you've acknowledged its existence, it knows you. Sarah's pulse raced. The words felt like a warning, meant for anyone foolish enough to read too far, yet she couldn't stop. Her eyes flicked down the page, hungry for more answers, for something that would explain the strange dread now gripping her. The report ended with the agent's disappearance. No trace of them was ever found. Just as Sarah was about to close the file, something slipped from between the pages, a photograph. Her heart lurched. It was a picture of the puppeteer. She stared at it, transfixed. The man stood in the shadows, holding the puppet in one hand, its limp wooden limbs hanging lifeless. But just like in the other reports, the man's face was a smudged blur. She felt the room shift, as though the very walls were pulling inward, enclosing her in a tightening grip. The temperature plummeted further, her breath now visible in the air. Suddenly, a sensation crawled up her spine, a cold, creeping awareness that she was no longer alone. Sarah's eyes darted to the edges of the room, to the corners where shadows seemed to gather unnaturally thick. The photograph fell from her hands, landing face up on the floor. In the silence, the ticking of the clock grew deafening, each second pounding in her ears. She bent down to pick up the photograph, but hesitated. Something was wrong. The puppet, it had moved. Its head was now turned, ever so slightly, looking directly at her. Sarah's breath hitched. She jerked upright, eyes wide, heart hammering in her chest. Her instinct was to flee, to leave the file, the photograph, the room, everything. But her legs refused to move. Her mind whirled. Had she seen it? Really seen it move? Then, she remembered. The warning. She glanced at the file's cover again. This time, the words in bold at the top seemed to scream at her. Do not open without official APE protective eyewear. Her stomach dropped. It was too late. She had opened it. She had seen it, and now it had seen her. The room dimmed as the shadows lengthened, closing in, and Sarah felt the unmistakable pull of invisible strings tightening around her wrists. She wasn't alone anymore. Knock. I was told to reach out here by my own intuitions and seeing through past experiences on this thread. So what the hell? To battle my own paranoia, and just to get tips on general in this situation, I figured this could be a place to get some answers to my problem. I currently attend a university. I won't say here, but just know that for the sake of this story, during the week I go to my classes Monday through Friday, and I go home on the weekend to spend time with my parents. My apartment I reside in, the building of which is right next to the university, is 2 stories with the front doors of each apartment immediately leading to outside, with no interior section of the building to speak of. I love my apartment. It's really small, but I'm never the type of person to shy away from making a place fit my interests and hobbies to a T. I was also always a cautious person, with my key ring also holding pepper spray, and the countless horror podcasts and horror movies I watch never helping. Living in an apartment alone, however, was always worth it to just live in a world of my own. I write in my spare time, but I'm mostly into crocheting whenever I had free time. It's just something I never really seemed to put down, and once I started a project I couldn't seem to stop. Other than the noisy neighbors I have, I never complain. I can hear everything they say, but it's not their fault. The walls in between the apartments are paper thin. Even when they sit on their couches that share the same wall with my own, I can hear the back of the couch hit it with a knock sound, annoying but tolerable. The reason I'm even writing this to begin with started about 2 weeks ago from today, Monday. My shift was over at work, and my only class for the day got moved over to Zoom. I was excited with this change in schedule because it gave me a good amount of time to get some cleaning done around my apartment and gave me some time to crochet. Once I was done cleaning, I sat down on my couch at around 7 p.m., the sun not shining through my window in my living room anymore. Knock. Looked like my neighbor was done for the day too. The next day, same routine. I am never the type of college kid to go out to parties and drink, but I had no issue with that. My parents always said, as long as I'm happy with what I'm doing. Well, that night I got too into what I was doing, taking very little breaks to look away from the crochet projects that I was working on, leaving to straining my eyes a lot. Around the time of 8 p.m., something felt off. I felt creeped out, like I was being watched. I didn't look up from my crochet. I couldn't let them know I sensed them. Knock. Good. My neighbor was home in case anything went wrong. Wednesday, same shit, different day, but this time, I had my later 6-9 class at night. I didn't mind it. History of film, never boring to me. I got back to my apartment and felt too tired to crochet for the night, so I just went straight to bed. Knock. One going to fast forward to next Monday. The knocking from my neighbors came in twos all of the sudden. Knock knock. I thought maybe he sat down then put his feet up. That made sense. Sure, but that night when I was crocheting it got weird. So the layout of my apartment from the point of view on my couch was that to my right there was a corner, blocking me from seeing my bedroom door and bathroom, but leaving me to still see my kitchen just enough. And to my left was just my window, front door and TV right in front of me. Knock knock. That feeling of being watched again. I got up and walked over to my window and pulled down the blinds to look to my right where my front door would be. Nothing. I also looked through the blinds and down at the parking lot below. My neighbor's car, usually parked right next mine, wasn't there. Knock knock. I walked over to the door's peephole to make sure someone was there knocking at my door. This was at 10 p.m., so it would have been weird if someone was knocking at that hour, especially since I didn't personally know anyone that would. Knock, knock. Nothing. Knock knock. My heart sank. I turned around with my blood running cold. I stared towards the end of my apartment at my bedroom door, wide open, and in the frame, appearing just so, was an eye staring back at me with their knuckle hitting the lower part of the door. Knock knock. There was no time to think. Luckily my phone was in my pocket, and my keys were on the table right next to the door. When I bolted outside of my apartment and sprinted to my car, I didn't hear any steps behind me. The wood from outside our doors on the second floor always makes noisy sounds with the planks making hollow sounds, but this time nothing. I called the police, then my mom and dad. The drive back home was silent. I usually always drove with music on to fill the silences of a 30-minute drive, but not this time. I cried to my parents when I got home. I was tired and just wanted to hear what the police had to say about the person in my apartment. We always tried to be careful with me living alone to the best of our abilities, and how that would affect me emotionally and mentally. But some things like this, there's just no justifications. The next day the news came. The cops didn't find anything in my apartment, and they questioned my neighbors. Most importantly, the one right behind my couch. He just got back to his apartment from a month-long vacation that morning. I couldn't think after the cop delivered that news to me at my parents' house. To be honest, it was all just a blur the more and more I thought about what it meant. I missed a lot of classes after that. I felt awful for my parents having to drive me back and forth an hour altogether every day. There was just so many days I never had the energy to focus to even go to any of my classes or even work. I didn't want to go back to my apartment. My parents understood, and we all agreed the situation was exhausting on all of us. My parents paid half the rent towards my apartment, so of course they were upset about this whole thing for that fact as well, and rightfully so. Moving forward to now, my parents went out to dinner tonight with friends and left me to dog sit our 2 dogs for the night. The house has a better security system than my pepper spray, with a locking sliding glass door and alarm that goes off whenever a door opens somewhere that's not the garage door. It's also spring break this whole week, and at the end of break I think I'm almost ready to go back to my apartment, and will obviously do a deep search when I come back, which is why I'm here. If you guys any tips on what I should do when I get back, please let me know at the bottom of this post. He's at the screen door. I think my wife voluntarily gave herself to the forest. How long does grieving last? I asked myself every single day for almost 3 years since my wife disappeared, and I never got an answer. The reminder that I was alone came every time I woke up and went to bed. Eventually, the reality sets in, and I start to get used to eating alone, brushing my teeth alone, grocery shopping alone, and just being alone. I thought enough time had passed that I didn't have to ask myself that question anymore, until the day I got a phone call from the nursing team who took care of my mother-in-law. Denise, the old lady, was planning on moving herself into a nearby nursing home, but now it sounds like she had too passed. When I arrived at their home, I was met by one of the nurses who had taken care of Denise. She tried to leave quickly, not wanting to stay around the house long. We had a small conversation about where everything was in the home, and how most of the things inside were packed up and ready for storage, and then were given a set of keys for the house, each labeled with the rooms inside. I tried to ask for more details, but all the nurse gave me was a passing chuckle as she turned to go to her car, getting inside and driving away without another word. It was a reasonable response when it involved anything that had to do with Denise. The old lady was going on 80 and was unbearable to be around. The last time I had spoken to her, most of our conversation was loud coughing and nonsense. The old house smelt like a hospital. Cardboard boxes were stacked randomly around the home, with a thin layer of dust blanketing each surface. The TV and larger furniture stayed unpacked, only covered in a layer of plastic wrap. I was married to my wife for 5 years before she vanished, and I don't recall ever being in her childhood home. The old house sat in a suburban row of homes, all facing away from the tree line leading into the dense woods of the Pacific Northwest. I stuffed the keys into my pockets and carefully squeezed between the stacked boxes. Small framed pictures of my wife at various ages still hung along the walls and sat across the small coffee table. I guess Denise wanted to take these in her bag. Or maybe, like me, it was difficult to let her go. With no one left in the family, the responsibility fell on me to take care of what was left of their belongings. I figured I would get the boxes to storage and clean the rest of the house before deciding what to do with it. I loaded a couple into my car, staring at the dishes and kitchenware, before stumbling on a pile of boxes with her name written across them. When I reared to the silent house, with a long, deep breath, I carried the boxes to the coffee table and opened them. Inside were articles of clothing, old bound notebooks, photo albums, and school memorabilia. I flipped through them, and seeing her on every page brought tears. Her smile lit up each sun-faded page, and each wood frame she was captured in threatened to set on fire with her warmth. These boxes were going to stay with me. I dried my tears and kept going, wanting to see more of her. I moved away a pile of old clothes and notebooks, when my hand met something hard and hollow. Buried at the bottom of one of the boxes were a hefty bag of small CDs and a handheld video camera. I pulled them out and immediately went to turn it on. Unsurprisingly, the old thing wouldn't turn on, and the battery compartment was corroded shut with the old batteries still inside. I wrestled with it in the kitchen with a butter knife and got it opened and cleaned. Then with the double as from the TV remote, got the thing to switch on. I inspected the camera again, excited to get it working, and saw it had a name written in marker on the side. Gwen. I shuffled through the CDs, each labeled with a date, a few not. The first was for her 8th birthday. The small red-haired girl's face was right up in the camera lens, peering in with her bright steel blue eyes. She let out an excited squeal and ran to hug her parents, thanking her mom and dad for the expensive gift. I guess filmmaking had always been her passion. Her father responded with something unintelligible and a heavy cough before he left the frame. I had never met the man when he was alive, and she never talked much about him. A moment later he returned with a big birthday cake, and then the three ate it together. The rest of the CD was just them eating before shutting off randomly. The old CDs didn't have that much storage, each having only about 20 minutes of memory. I spent the next few hours going through her childhood. Several moments in the videos I recall her telling me about. Late nights when we would lay in bed and talk until sunrise. Other moments just small silly things a child with a video camera would film. Her father eventually showed up less and less in the videos, his cough worsening every time until he was no longer in them. For a long while the videos stopped, a large year-long gap, before I saw her face again. Her smiles were never the same. She talked less, and some videos were just her talking about her day to her father and writing silently in her notebooks. Eventually the pile of memories grew smaller and smaller, and when I almost reached the end of the dated discs, I decided to take a look at one without any date on it. Heavy breathing interlaced with the crackle of the built-in microphone blasted through the tiny speakers, filling up the empty home more than everything else that night. The screen was dark, with only a small light coming from the left corner of the video. The lens stuttered and focused. Eventually I was able to make out a line of trees and a street light, but the image was still blurred. It stayed focused on the dark woods for another moment before the camera was pushed forward, hitting a glass surface before it struggled to focus once again, the heavy breathing of my wife still close to the microphone. I leaned in as if it would help the video focus, the blurry tree line being barely visible in the dark. Between the breaths of my wife, I could hear the camera force itself to focus, sharpening itself until the woods got steadily more and more visible. The camera stayed like that for 18 minutes, glued in position, and so did my wife. My eyes stayed trained on the trees just like she was in the video, watching for any movement at all, only leaving the tree line to check the timer on the video. It got to 19 minutes, and then as it slowly reached its end something shifted in the trees. The video ended, blinding me with the harsh blue menu of the settings screen. Immediately, I replaced the disc with another unmarked one. The next one was during the day. She stood just at the edge of the woods, camera raised and pointed towards the thick darkness created by the trees. The normally tranquil sounds of birds and nature in the background were sometimes interrupted by a heavy cough. Each time the camera fell for a moment, I imagined she tried to stifle her cough. I watched again to the end of this video. All 20 minutes of just the camera pointed into the woods, but nothing happened. The following 4 undated videos also showed nothing, just my wife at various points and locations around her house, filming the woods for 20 minutes. The audio was always just background noise, coughing, and the mechanical whirl of the camera's focus. On the last dated one, I could see her reflection in the window as she filmed. She sat in the kitchen, the camera pointed towards the window above her sink and the tree line beyond her yard. She was probably about 15 or 16 at this point, looking just like the first time we had met in high school. The camera tried to focus again on the woods, zooming between her reflection and the tree line. She let out another cough, this time just a brief one, and then opened a bottle of pills, swallowing them dry before letting the camera roll to its end. I had run out of CDs. I stood from my spot on the ground and turned towards the kitchen window. It was now nighttime, making the darkness of the tree line even more oppressing than it was a few moments earlier on the screen. I stood and stared for a moment like she did, trying to scan the dark with my eyes, but the trees stayed the same. With a shudder, I pulled the blinds down to shut the window and made my way back to with the help of my phone light. There were no more videos. I carelessly dumped out the rest of the boxes with her name on them across the floor and found nothing. Realizing what I'd done to what I had left of my wife, I started to mournfully repack her items neatly into the boxes when I accidentally kicked something across the ground. Her notebooks. I picked them up and laid them across the coffee table. There were only 3 of them, one of them a locked toy Barbie notebook that I wasn't going to get open unless I smashed the thing, and the other 2 old leather-bound style books. I carefully unwrapped the straps around them and flipped through the weathered pages, mostly filled with bits of writing and drawings. Across the 2 available notebooks, her art style visibly improved, and she wrote less and less. Like the videos, the drawings were about her and her parents. Unfortunately, they were almost exactly like the videos. chronicling and recording how ill her father eventually got more and more ill. The drawings and entries transitioned from them getting ice cream, hiking, and summer barbecues to hospital visits, sitting on their back porch and looking into the woods. Then it was just the woods. The second half of her third notebook was just pages and pages of the trees, and nothing more, until the last 2 pages. The graphite of the pencil was aggressively forced into the paper, splaying out an image of the tree line into the last 2 pages of her notebook. I ran my fingers along each tree and could feel them etched into the page. The black powder left behind by her pencil so long ago still stained my fingertips. In the middle of the page, done by what I assumed was an eraser trying to remove the forest from the notebook, stood a gaunt figure towering over the trees. I closed the notebooks and set them back in the box and sealed them once again. I turned on every light in the house, first the entire ground floor, before making my way to the upstairs. I wanted to snuff out every single dark corner of this home to chase away a fear I refused to acknowledge. I shifted through the keychain in my pocket, entered every room, and turned on every light until I reached the locked door at the end of the hallway. I had 1 key left, one with her name written on the small tag that clung to it. Gwen. 2 times the keys fell out of my hands until I finally got them into the lock. It didn't click like the rest of the doors, but instead, the lock turned with a rusted and sticky scrape. I thought Denise was joking when she said she had left my wife's room, the same as the day she left and never opened it. But I realized now that she was telling the truth. I coughed hard as I pushed on the door. It took an agonizing amount of force to open, and as it did, it pushed something across the floor, sending dust from on top of the door frame down on my head. My hand reached for where the light switch should be but couldn't find anything. I opened the door wider so that the light from the hallway could spill into the room enough for me to see. Her desk was stacked with at least 100 of the same leather-bound notebooks she had in her box, the strap barely holding them close as they were stuffed with extra sheets of paper. Scattered across the ground were even more of them, their pages ripped out. Moonlight tried to enter the room through the window but was forced back by something covering the glass. I took out my phone to shine its light across the walls to see where the ripped pages went. Across every surface possible were drawings of the woods. I can stop playing Balatro. It won't let me. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't even know if I'm still me. But if anyone out there has ever seen a Joker called the Dealer, please stop playing. Delete your game. Walk away. I know how crazy this sounds. I wouldn't believe it either, if I weren't living it. It started about a week ago. I'd been grinding Balatro for hours trying to break my high score. You know how it is. You hit a good run. The right multipliers line up, and suddenly you're in the zone. I was somewhere around ante 10, running a busted build with spectral and tarot cards, standard endless stuff. But then the game glitched. Just for a second. The screen flickered, like an old VHS tape struggling to play. The shop refreshed without me clicking anything. My chips jumped by an impossible amount, like millions out of nowhere. I thought maybe I'd miscounted, but when I went to check my jokers, that's when I saw it. A new card, one I hadn't bought. The Dealer. It was positioned at the very bottom of my joker lineup, almost like it had snuck in. Its ability was just 3 words. Make a deal. That's it. No cost, no explanation. The artwork was different from the rest of the game, hyper-detailed, like an old black and white photograph of a man in a suit. The details were so sharp that I could almost see the texture of his tie, but his face, he didn't have one, just smooth blank skin where his features should be. I assumed it was some ultra-rare Joker I'd never seen. Maybe a secret update, a hidden card? I searched online but found nothing. No mention of it on Reddit, no data mines, nothing. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. I played another hand, and the game changed. At first, it seemed like a normal round. I placed my bet, drew my hand, but as soon as I played my first move, the game froze. Not crashed, just paused. Then, frame by frame, the cards started moving on their own. My hand rearranged itself. It discarded my picks and played a different combination. A royal flush. My multiplier skyrocketed, the game racking up chips faster than I could process. I didn't touch anything. The Dealer's card flickered, just for a second. The image moved, his faceless head subtly tilting toward me, like he knew I was watching. I felt wrong. Not scared, not yet, just off. Like the game had decided I wasn't playing it anymore. Like it was playing me. But I kept going. Ante 12. The shop was different. Normally you get random jokers, cards, maybe a booster pack, but now the shop was empty. All except for one card. The Gambler's Remorse. Another joker I'd never seen before. The artwork was unsettling. A close-up of a pair of hands gripping a poker chip so tightly that the skin had split, blood seeping down the fingers. The ability text was unreadable, just corrupted symbols and static lines. I tried to leave the shop. The button didn't work. I tried to force close the game. Nothing. So I did the only thing I could do. I bought the card. The moment I did, my screen went black. For a full 10 seconds, just darkness. I was about to reboot my PC when a single line of text appeared, white against the void. "You're ready to see." Then the game came back. But it wasn't the same game anymore. Everything looked wrong. The pixel art was sharper. Too sharp. Like it had been upscaled beyond its limits. The background was darker. The dealer's hands on the table too detailed for a game like this. It felt like staring at a real poker table through a screen. And then I saw the cards. They weren't normal anymore. The suits were replaced with symbols I didn't recognize. Things that looked almost organic, shifting when I looked at them too long. Some of the number values were impossible, stretching into the thousands. One of my face cards wasn't even a card at all. It was a photo of my own desktop. That was the first time I really felt it. The deep sinking horror in my stomach. I moved my mouse. The cursor in the photo moved too. I closed the game immediately. At least, I thought I did. My screen went black again, and this time, my reflection stared back at me. But something was wrong with it. My face was delayed, like a bad webcam feed, lagging behind my real movements by a fraction of a second. Then, the reflection smiled. I hadn't moved. A sharp knock hit my window. I live on the 4th floor. I haven't reopened Balatro since, but it doesn't matter, because today, while I was at work, I left my PC off, unplugged it completely. When I got home, the monitor was on, and there was a new note on my desk. A poker card, face down. I flipped it over. It was the dealer, and underneath, scrawled in jagged ink, Ante 14 awaits. The time I was dinner. The crash was the easy part. 1 second, I was gripping the wheel, my headlights cutting through the rain. The next, I was spinning, metal groaned, my tires lifted off the ground. A sickening lurch twisted my stomach as the car flipped, slammed into something hard, and came to a rest upside down. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breath, ragged and sharp in the suffocating silence. Then came the pain, a deep searing ache in my ribs. A hot trickle down my forehead. My fingers trembled as I unbuckled myself, dropping onto the roof of the car. The windshield was shattered, glass scattered, like jagged stars in the dim glow of my dying headlights. I had to get out. The driver's side was crushed against a tree, but the passenger door groaned open with effort. I crawled through, wincing as twigs and stones bit into my palms. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, mist curling through the trees, thick and heavy. My phone was in my jacket pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was a spiderweb of cracks, dead. Shit. I turned in a slow circle. The road was gone, lost somewhere behind a wall of trees. My car had veered deep into the woods. No headlights, no distant hum of passing cars, just the chirp of unseen insects and the whisper of the wind. I sucked in a breath, tasting damp earth and the faint copper tang of blood. I needed help. A flicker of movement in the distance made me freeze. A shadow shifted between the trees, too far to make out. My pulse kicked up. Hello? My voice was hoarse, raw from the crash. Silence. Then, a lantern flickered to life. It wasn't just a trick of my eyes. There was someone ahead, just beyond the mist. The glow wavered, then started toward me. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunched against the damp leaves. Relief flooded me. Hey, thank God. The light stopped. A figure stepped into view. An old man, hunched beneath a thick coat, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a wide hat. The lantern in his grip swayed gently, casting his features in flickering light. His eyes were pale, almost colorless. Car crash. His voice was a rasp, like dead leaves dragged across stone. I swallowed hard. Yeah, do you have a phone? I need to call for help. He tilted his head slightly. No phone, but my house ain't far. I hesitated. The stranger studied me. Unreadable, the woods stretched in every direction. A labyrinth of darkness. If I stayed, I risked hypothermia, or worse, if I went. All right, I said, lead the way. The old man turned without another word, his lantern bobbing as he walked. I followed, my ribs protesting every step. The forest pressed in around us. The trees twisted and gnarled, their bark peeling in thick, curling strips. The farther we went, the quieter it became. The air felt wrong, thick with something I couldn't name. After what felt like forever, the house emerged from the fog. It was old, its wooden walls gray and swollen with age. The porch sagged, the windows dark, empty eyes staring into the night. A weathered wind chime hung from the eaves, silent, despite the breeze. The old man pushed open the door. The hinges creaked like a wounded animal. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Everything in me screamed not to, but the cold was sinking into my bones, and I had no other choice. I stepped inside. The first night in that house was restless. My body ached from the crash, and every sound in the old wooden structure set my nerves on edge. The walls creaked, the wind howled through unseen cracks, and the heavy scent of cooked meat still lingered in the air. I barely slept. When I finally drifted off, I had strange dreams. Dark figures loomed over me, whispering in a language I didn't understand. A sharp pain jolted me awake, and I found myself gripping my own arm, my nails digging into my skin like claws. My mouth was dry, my stomach twisting with an unfamiliar hunger. The next morning, Mary greeted me with a wide smile, a steaming plate of eggs, thick slices of ham, and fresh bread already set on the table. You need to eat, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I hesitated. I really appreciate everything you've done, but I should probably start figuring out how to get back to town. Maybe there's a road nearby, a way I could walk? Henry chuckled, settling into his chair across from me. Roads around here ain't exactly reliable, and you're still in rough shape. Best to stay put until we can get you properly patched up. Something in his voice made me pause. I glanced at Mary, but she was busy pouring coffee into a chipped ceramic mug, her expression unreadable. I swallowed thickly and took a bite of the ham. It was rich, almost too rich, but I forced myself to chew and swallow. Mary and Henry exchanged a glance. Good, Mary murmured. You need your strength. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way their eyes lingered on me as I ate. The day passed slowly. The house had no electricity, no phone, and according to Henry, the nearest town was a good 40 miles off, through thick forest and rough land. He offered to take a look at my car later, but his tone was casual, too casual, as if he already knew it wouldn't be going anywhere. I explored the house when they weren't watching. The rooms were sparse but clean, the furniture handmade and sturdy. In the back room I found something strange. Hooks hanging from the ceiling, thick ropes coiled neatly beside them. A long wooden table sat in the center, deep grooves cut into its surface. My stomach twisted. When I turned to leave, Henry was standing in the doorway. Looking for something? His voice was light, but his eyes were sharp. I forced a smile, just stretching my legs. He nodded slowly. Best not to wander too much. This house has a way of keeping folks where they belong. That night, I locked my bedroom door and wedged a chair under the handle. The hunger in my stomach grew worse, a gnawing emptiness I couldn't explain. And as I lay in bed, listening to the distant sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, I realized I might not be the one in control here. I might already be trapped. The morning air was thick with the scent of cooking meat again, but this time it turned my stomach. I sat up, disoriented, my head pounding. My skin felt clammy, as if I had sweated through the night, but the air in the room was ice cold. I got up and pressed my ear against the door. Silence. No movement, no voices. But something felt wrong. My mouth was dry, and my limbs ached. But not just from the accident. Something deeper, as if my body was starting to betray me. I hesitated before pulling the chair away from the door and slowly turning the knob. The hallway was empty, the wooden floor creaking under my steps. I moved cautiously, my bare feet light against the boards. As I neared the kitchen, the smell grew stronger, more pungent. Mary stood at the stove, humming softly. A thick slab of meat sizzled in a cast-iron skillet. She turned as she heard me approach, her smile warm but her eyes cool. "Morning, dear. You slept in. That's good. You need your rest." I swallowed hard. "What time is it?" "Oh, just past noon," she said, flipping the meat with a practiced hand. "You must have been exhausted. Your body needs time to heal." My stomach twisted. Noon. I had never been a heavy sleeper, and I could swear I had only dozed off for a few hours. Henry was nowhere to be seen. I shifted uneasily. "Where's Henry?" Mary stirred something into a pot, her movements slow, deliberate, tending to some things outside. "Won't be back for a bit, but don't you worry, you've got me to keep you company." A lump formed in my throat. I forced myself to nod and sat down at the table. A plate was already waiting for me. The same rich, glistening meat, the same thick bread. It looked darker today. I poked at it with my fork, my stomach churning. Mary sat across from me, resting her chin in her palm. "Go on, eat, you're wasting away." I cut a piece, my hand trembling slightly. I raised it to my mouth, but the moment it touched my tongue, a metallic taste spread across my palate. My teeth clamped down instinctively, and the texture was wrong. Too dense, too fibrous. My throat tightened. Mary watched me. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow. My insides recoiled. "Good, good," she said, that same pleased murmur from before. "You're getting stronger already." I pushed my plate away. "I think I need some air." Mary's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. But then she nodded. "Of course, dear. Just don't wander too far." I stepped outside, my breath coming fast. The cool air hit me like a wave, and I leaned against the porch railing, trying to steady myself. Something rustled near the tree line. I squinted. A figure stood just beyond the clearing, half hidden by the branches. My heart jumped into my throat. It wasn't Henry. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was watching me. I took a slow step back, my pulse hammering. The figure tilted its head, just slightly. And then, it was gone. I stumbled backward into the house, slamming the door shut. Mary looked up from her cooking, unfazed. "Something wrong, dear?" I shook my head, but the hairs on the back of my neck were still standing. "No, just thought I saw something." Mary smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing out there but the woods, love. You're safe in here." Safe. I swallowed the taste of iron still lingering in my mouth. I wasn't so sure about that anymore. I woke to the sound of soft murmurs just beyond my door. The voices were low, almost melodic, and I couldn't make out the words. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the moment I shifted in bed, the murmurs stopped. Silence. Then, light footsteps retreating down the hall. I stayed still for a long time, my pulse hammering in my ears. I knew I had locked the door. I knew I had wedged the chair under the handle. And yet, as I turned my head, I saw it. The chair was back where it had been before, neatly pushed under the desk. My stomach turned violently. I threw off the blanket and went straight to the door. Locked, bolted from the inside. There was no way anyone could have come in. No way they could have left without me hearing them undoing the lock. Unless they had never used the door. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I stepped back from the door as if expecting it to swing open on its own. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. My breath came faster, shallower. I needed to get out of there. I crossed to the window, gripping the frame, ready to pry it open, but it didn't budge. The old wood was warped, sealed shut by time and humidity. My fingers dug into the frame as panic started to build. A knock at the door made me freeze. "Breakfast is ready," Mary called softly. "Come on down now, dear." Her voice was too sweet, too calm, like she already knew I'd have no choice but to obey. I swallowed hard, wiped my damp palms on my jeans, and forced myself to answer. "They'll be right there." The floorboards creaked as she walked away. I turned back to the window, staring out into the endless stretch of trees, the thick woods swallowing any sign of the outside world. The thought of walking through them, completely alone, terrified me almost as much as staying here. Almost. Still, I needed a plan, because one way or another, I wasn't going to let myself stay trapped. Not until they decided I was ready. Not until they decided I was ripe. I forced myself downstairs, keeping my steps light, controlled. The kitchen smelled rich, heavy, like butter, sizzling fat, something seared to perfection. My stomach twisted, uncertain if it was hunger or nausea. Mary turned as I entered, flashing that too perfect smile. "There you are, sweetheart. You slept well, I hope?" "Yeah," I lied, settling into the same chair as yesterday. Henry sat across from me, already chewing through a thick slice of meat. He met my gaze, chewing slowly, deliberately. Mary set a plate in front of me. Steak, eggs, roasted potatoes, glistening with oil. The steak was thick, nearly bleeding at the center. "Eat up," Henry said, voice low, expectant. I picked up my fork. My fingers felt stiff, reluctant, like my body knew something I didn't. The first bite hit my tongue, savory, iron-rich. My stomach clenched as I swallowed, the taste lingering. It was too rich, too familiar. My hands trembled. I glanced at Mary, but she was watching me, expectant. Henry too, like they were waiting for something. I needed to get out of here. I forced another bite down, then set my fork aside. "Henry, about my car. Checked it this morning," he cut in. "Told you it was in bad shape." I held his gaze. "How bad?" Mary wiped her hands on her apron. "Oh, honey, ain't no fixing that thing. Just you stay here. Let us take care of you." The words twisted in my gut like spoiled food. "I don't want to impose," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe I can hike out, find help." Mary clicked her tongue, shaking her head. "Oh, sweetheart, you wouldn't last an hour out there." Henry grunted in agreement. Woods ain't kind to folks who don't belong. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. "I need some air," I muttered, standing. Mary's smile twitched. "Of course, dear." I stepped onto the porch, inhaling deeply. The air was thick with the scent of trees, damp earth, something faintly metallic underneath it all. The woods stretched endlessly in every direction. No sign of roads, power lines, anything. The house wasn't just remote, it was hidden. I took a careful step off the porch, then another. The grass was damp beneath my bare feet, the earth oddly soft. I moved slowly, testing them. They didn't call out to stop me. Not yet. I reached the tree line, heart hammering. If I ran, if I just kept moving, then I saw it. A clearing, just beyond the trees. Clothes, torn, dirt-streaked. A shoe, a dark stain in the grass. A gut-wrenching realization settled over me. I wasn't the first person to end up here. And if I didn't figure out a way to escape, I wouldn't be the last. I took a step back, breath catching in my throat. The clearing before me wasn't just a random patch of earth. It was a graveyard, a place where something, or someone, had been left to rot. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around. Henry stood on the porch watching. His face was blank, unreadable, but his hands were tucked deep into his pockets, shoulders relaxed, like he already knew what I had seen, like he was waiting for my reaction. Mary stepped out beside him, wiping her hands on a stained cloth. "You're wandering again, sweetheart." Her voice was soft, almost scolding, like I was a child who had strayed too far. I swallowed hard, trying to force down the panic rising in my chest. I just wanted some air. Henry nodded slowly. "That's understandable." He glanced past me, toward the clearing. "See anything interesting?" I forced my face into something neutral. "Just trees." Pause. A flicker of something in Henry's expression. Disappointment. Amusement. "Good," he finally said. "Best to keep your eyes on what's in front of you, not what's behind." The words slithered down my spine like ice water. Mary smiled. "Come inside, dear. Supper's almost ready." I hesitated. Henry's posture didn't change, but the air around him did. It thickened, pressed in. The woods felt too quiet, too expectant. I nodded. "Yeah, sure." They stepped back, letting me inside first. As I crossed the threshold, I felt it, like the house itself inhaled, pulling me in. The walls felt closer, the air heavier, thick with something more than just the smell of cooking meat. The door shut behind me. The lock clicked. I was running out of time. I needed to find a way out. Fast. Dinner was already set when I walked into the kitchen. A steaming bowl of stew sat in the center of the table. The deep brown broth swirling with chunks of meat, thick-cut vegetables, and something else, something dark and stringy. The smell was intoxicating, rich and savory. My stomach twisted in hunger. "Sit," Mary said, already lowering herself into her chair. Henry followed, slow and deliberate. His eyes never left me as I hesitated by the table. "Go on," he said. "You've been looking a little thin." A chill ran through me. My fingers curled against the back of the chair. I needed to play this carefully. I forced a tired smile and sat down, reaching for the spoon. The first bite slid over my tongue, warm and fatty. My body reacted before my brain could, welcoming the food, the nourishment. Mary beamed. "That's a good boy." I kept eating, slow and measured. Each bite was a battle. Every muscle in my body screaming at me to stop. Every ounce of instinct telling me that I shouldn't be swallowing this, that it was wrong. But I had to keep them believing I was pliant, that I wasn't thinking of running. Henry finished his bowl before I did, pushing back from the table with a sigh. "You're gonna sleep well tonight," he said. "Body's working hard to heal, needs the rest." I nodded. "I appreciate everything. Really." His eyes flickered with amusement. "We know, son. That's why we're taking such good care of you." I forced another smile, then excused myself, saying I was exhausted. I didn't look back as I walked down the hall to my room. Once inside, I locked the door and shoved the chair beneath the handle. My stomach felt full, but the hunger hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened, turned into something else, something I didn't understand. I pressed a hand against my abdomen. My skin was warm, hot, even. My head felt light, my limbs heavy. Something was wrong. I stumbled to the window, fumbling with the latch. It wouldn't budge. My fingers were clumsy, uncoordinated. Footsteps creaked outside my door. A voice, low knowing. "Henry." "Sleep tight," he murmured. A shadow passed beneath the doorframe, then silence. I sank onto the bed, heart hammering. My vision swam, the edges of the room blurring. Something was very, very wrong, and I was running out of time. The heat in my body only worsened. I lay on the bed, sweating through my clothes, my breath coming in slow, shallow gasps. My stomach churned, not in pain, but in some awful, insatiable need. The food had filled me, but it hadn't satisfied me. Something inside me was changing. I pressed a trembling hand against my chest. My heart pounded, faster than it should. My skin felt tight, stretched too thin over my bones. My fingers twitched against the sheets, itching with a restless energy I didn't understand. I needed to get out of here. I forced myself to sit up, dizziness washing over me. My limbs felt heavier, but I pushed through it. The room was suffocating, the air thick and humid. Every breath felt like I was inhaling something rotten, something spoiled. The stew. What the hell had they fed me? I stumbled toward the window again, gripping the frame with clammy hands. The latch still wouldn't budge. My fingers scraped against the wood, my nails digging in deeper than they should, deeper than was normal. I yanked my hands back. My nails had thickened, darkened. I swallowed hard. My reflection in the glass was warped in the moonlight, but I swore my pupils were too wide, swallowing up too much of my eyes. My skin looked flushed, almost feverish. Panic clawed up my throat. I turned toward the door, my mind racing. I had to get out. I had to find a way to escape before. A noise. Not from the hallway. From inside my room. I froze. Something shifted in the corner. A dark mass huddled near the floor. At first I thought my fevered mind was playing tricks on me, but then it moved again, slow and deliberate. Breathing, low, raspy. I wasn't alone. I reached blindly for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around the metal lamp on the nightstand. I yanked it free, gripping it tight as I took a slow step forward. "Who's there?" My voice came out hoarse, strained. The breathing stopped. Then, a whisper, soft as silk. "You're almost ready." A jolt of terror shot through me. I swung the lamp. It passed through empty air. The shadow was gone. Only the whisper remained, curling around my skull, burrowing deep into my bones. I was changing, and I didn't know if I could stop it. I dropped the lamp, my hand trembling as I backed into the corner of the room. My pulse raced in my ears, drowning out all sound except the rush of blood through my veins. The whisper lingered in my mind, the words curling like smoke, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "You're almost ready." For what? What did that mean? I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my throat was dry, tight, as if something inside me had already begun to choke the life out of my voice. The room felt colder now, the air thick, pressing down on me like a weight. I could hear my breath, shallow and uneven, as I fought to keep control. The walls felt like they were closing in, the edges of the room bending and warping as though reality itself was starting to splinter. I glanced back at the window, but the reflection that stared back at me wasn't mine. It was wrong. The eyes in the glass were too wide, too dark, a twisted version of myself, staring back in silence. A low chuckle echoed in the room. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart thundered in my chest. I needed to get out of this place. I needed to escape, but every step I took toward the door felt heavier, more laborious. The hunger inside me pulsed like a heartbeat, an insistent throb that only grew worse the more I tried to ignore it. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "You're one of us now." I gripped the doorknob, forcing it open, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if something on the other side was holding it shut, a force I couldn't see but could feel, pressing against the wood, keeping me trapped inside. I looked around the room in a panic. There had to be a way out. There had to be something I could do to get free. My eyes landed on the table in the corner, the one with the deep grooves etched into its surface. My breath caught in my throat. The hooks, the ropes. They hadn't been there when I first explored the room. Had they, or had I just ignored them? I stepped toward the table, unable to look away from the crude implements. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest with a sickening heaviness. I had to get out. But where could I go? What was happening to me? A sound behind me made me spin around. It was Mary. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her lips curling into a smile that was far too sweet, far too unnatural. "I told you," she said, her voice low and silky. "You'd be one of us soon enough." I took a step back, fear rising in my chest, but something in her gaze stopped me. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, held me in place, like a predator luring its prey. My body trembled, and the hunger inside me, God, it was unbearable now, roared to life, deep in my gut. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. "I'm sorry," Mary continued, her voice soothing, but her words only twisted deeper inside my mind. "You were always meant to be here. We've been waiting for you, for so long." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was like her voice had wrapped around my brain, pulling me into some dark, suffocating place where escape wasn't even possible. I wanted to scream. I needed to scream, but I couldn't. "You'll understand soon," she said. "You'll understand what we are, what we do." I tried to shake my head, tried to fight the pull of her words, but it was like they were sinking into my soul, rooting me to the spot. My body trembled, and I could feel the change, the shift in me growing stronger, harder to resist. The hunger, it was unbearable. Mary stepped forward, her hand reaching out toward me. I flinched, instinctively stepping back, but the movement was too slow, too late. Her hand landed on my arm, and the heat that shot through my skin was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was fire and ice, pain and pleasure, all tangled into one. I gasped, my breath hitching, but it didn't matter. Her touch burned through me, through everything I was. "Time to come home," she whispered. Her grip tightened, and I felt it. The change, it spread like wildfire, racing through my veins, crawling under my skin. My body, my soul, everything about me was shifting, turning into something else. Something I couldn't control. And as Mary's smile stretched wider, as her grip tightened further, I realized there was no escape. There had never been. I was becoming part of this twisted thing, part of whatever they were, and it was too late to turn back now. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like a creeping vine, winding around my body and squeezing tighter with each passing second. The hunger, it gnawed at me from the inside, a constant presence now. Every movement felt unnatural, every breath too shallow. Mary's grip on my arm was still there, but it wasn't the burning heat anymore. It had become something else, something cold. It seeped into my skin, down into my bones, until I felt like I was nothing but a shell of who I used to be. "You're one of us now," she whispered again, her voice low and hypnotic. She smiled, but it wasn't comforting. It wasn't kind. It was something else entirely. "You're not going anywhere. Not anymore." I wanted to scream, to pull away, but my body felt alien to me now. I couldn't move the way I used to. My legs felt stiff, my arms heavy. I tried to lift them, tried to break free of her grasp, but it was as if my body was no longer mine to control. My fingers curled involuntarily, pressing against the cold surface of the floor beneath me. There was no escape, not from the house, and not from whatever I was becoming. I looked at her, tried to focus on her face, but everything seemed blurry now. My vision flickered, shifting in and out of focus. My thoughts were muddled, swirling in a fog I couldn't clear. Was this what she meant? Was this the change she'd been talking about? "You've been chosen," she continued, her tone almost gentle now, as if trying to soothe me. "We all were. You just didn't know it yet." Her words echoed in my head, repeating over and over, twisting around my mind until I could barely hear anything else. My mouth was dry, my heart pounding in my chest, but the pain, the hunger, it was worse than anything I'd ever felt. Chosen for what? I managed to croak, my voice thin, almost foreign to my ears. Mary's smile deepened, and she leaned in closer, so close I could feel the warmth of her breath against my skin, to be part of something bigger. We feed, we grow stronger, we evolve. Evolve? What was she talking about? Something inside me screamed. I tried to resist, tried to hold on to the last shred of who I was, but it was slipping away. I could feel it, like sand sifting through my fingers. I don't want this," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. Mary's smile never wavered. She let go of my arm, but the coldness lingered, spreading through me like poison. "It doesn't matter what you want. You'll see, soon enough." I staggered back, my legs unsteady, but I didn't fall. I didn't collapse. I had to focus. I had to get out. There had to be some way out of this. I took a few shaky steps, my body still stiff and unresponsive, but something pulled at me, something in the house. It was like a presence, a dark weight pressing down on me, making it harder to think, to move. I was trapped in my own body, trapped in this place. I glanced around the room, trying to find an exit. There had to be a door, a window, something. But the walls, they weren't the same. The edges were soft, shifting, and the room, everything about it felt warped. "Where are you going?" Mary asked, her voice suddenly sharp, laced with something that made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I pushed forward, dragging my legs like they were made of lead. My breath was coming faster now, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no escape, no way out. The house, it was alive, and I was becoming part of it. I was becoming part of whatever this was. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. It was as if I already knew what was coming. I had known deep down, all along. The hunger, the change. It was all consuming. I took another step, another, but the door was still too far. I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't strong enough. A hand touched my shoulder. I froze. It wasn't Mary this time. It was Henry. His face was too calm, too still, like he knew exactly what was happening, exactly what I was becoming. "Don't run," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "There's no place to go." I wanted to push him away. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt like it was closing up, suffocating me. His touch, it was cold, too cold. I looked down at my hands, but they weren't mine anymore. My fingers had elongated, the nails sharp and twisted, like claws. My skin, pale and bruised, stretched over bones that felt thinner, more fragile than they had ever been before. I didn't recognize the reflection in the window anymore. It wasn't my face staring back at me. It was something else, something hollow, something hungry. I staggered back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What have you done to me?" I choked out, my voice breaking. Mary stepped forward, her hands gentle on my shoulders. "We've made you one of us," she said softly. "You're part of our family now. You'll understand. You'll feed, and then when the time is right, you'll grow just like we did." I felt something inside me snap. I couldn't take it anymore. The hunger inside me, the gnawing, terrible need, it was unbearable. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't run. I wasn't sure if I was screaming, or if the sound was coming from somewhere else entirely. But the last thing I saw before the world went black was Henry and Mary, standing together watching me, waiting for me. And I knew, deep down, that I had already become something else. I had already become a part of them. And there was no turning back now. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't matter anymore. It's all a blur now, shadows and whispers, hunger and darkness. I've lost track of how many times I've given in, how many times I've fed. It's like waking up in a nightmare that never ends. I should have seen it coming. I should have known when I first walked into that house, when I first smelled the meat on the air, when I first saw the hooks, the ropes. They were all signs, signs I ignored, because I thought I was in control, thought I could escape. But I was never meant to escape. There's no escape from this. No way to break free of what they've turned me into. The hunger, it's worse now. It doesn't just gnaw at me anymore. It devours me. I can feel it in my chest, in my limbs, deep in my bones, as if every part of me is starved for something I can never get enough of. It's like a fire inside me, a wildfire that consumes everything in its path, but I can't put it out. I can't stop it. I don't know what I was before, what I was, but that's all slipping away. Everything that made me human, everything that kept me tethered to the world outside, it's gone. And in its place there's this thing, this creature that doesn't feel anything anymore. No warmth, no compassion, just hunger. The others, Henry and Mary, they watch me now. They watch me, but they never speak. They don't need to. They know what I've become. They know what I've done. I can feel their eyes on me when I feed. I can feel them waiting for me to take that final step, to finally fully surrender to what I am. They don't care about the person I was. They never did. They only care about the monster I've become, a monster like them. There are no mirrors here, no windows, no reflection to remind me of who I used to be. I only see the shadows, only see the way my hands have changed. The claws, the pale skin, the hollow eyes, the way my hunger never stops. The way I've learned to feed without thought, without remorse. The worst part, I'm starting to forget, and forgetting what it was like to be me. But there's one thing I know for certain, deep down, one truth that's still clear in the haze of everything that's happened. He'll never leave this place, not alive, and not the way I was before. I hear footsteps now, they're familiar, soft, slow. Mary, she's always there, always watching. She comes closer, her voice low, soft like the wind. "You're ready," she says, and I feel the words settle deep inside me, like a mark, an irreversible change. I don't know what I'm ready for, but I know I can't stop it. The hunger, the change, it's already too far gone. The house feels different now, not just the walls or the furniture or the rooms. I feel different. I don't even know if I'm still the same person who stumbled into this place, who crashed that car, who thought she could escape. But I know one thing, I'm not scared anymore. The fear is gone, replaced by something darker, something deeper, something primal. I turn to face Mary, and for the first time since I got here, I look at her, really look at her, and I see it, the hunger in her eyes, the same hunger that's been gnawing at me. It's in all of us now. It's what we've become, what we always were meant to be. Her smile is soft, but there's something in it now, something that makes me feel cold. It's time, she whispers, as though she's been waiting for this moment. The hunger surges through me again, stronger this time. I can feel it, like a call. The others are waiting. They always are. And for the first time, I understand. I don't fight it. I won't. I walk with her down the hall, past the tables, the hooks, the ropes, down into the room where we do what we do best, where we feed. And as I sit down, as I begin, I don't feel regret. I don't feel fear. I feel hunger. And I know, deep inside me, that I will never be the same again. The room is colder now. The air is thick with anticipation, and the shadows seem to stretch longer with each passing second. Mary stands at the edge of the table, her face half lit by the dim flicker of a single candle. Her smile is all too knowing, but there's something else, something darker behind her eyes. She knows what's coming. She's been waiting for this, and so have I. The hunger is unbearable now. It's like a fire that's spread through my chest, down into my stomach, through my veins. It burns with a need that nothing can satisfy. Not food, not water, only this. I'm not just hungry anymore. I crave this. I need it. The blood, the meat, the taste of it all. It's no longer a choice. I don't even want to fight it. I look around the room, at the two figures bound to the chairs across from me, Henry and Mary. They're both silent, staring at me with cold, unwavering eyes. They don't speak. They don't need to. They know what I'm about to do. They know what I've become, and they want me to do it. The chair creaks as I sit down at the table, a table that seems to stretch forever, as if it could hold an endless amount of meat, of life to consume. But there's only one thing I need, only one thing that will quiet the gnawing inside me. I take a deep breath. My hands shake as I pick up the knife. It's not a big knife, not like the ones I've seen on the hooks above, but it's sharp, and it'll do the job. I look at Mary first. She's the one who made this happen, the one who invited me into this hellhole, but her smile is soft, like she's proud of me, proud of what I've become. She nods slowly. "Do it," she says, her voice barely a whisper. "You're ready." And I am, ready to feed. I turn to Henry, who's still watching me with those empty eyes. His jaw is clenched, and his body tenses as I approach, but he doesn't struggle. He doesn't try to run. He knows too. I raise the knife. His mouth opens, but no words come out, only a low guttural sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and then silence. I don't hesitate. I drive the knife into his chest, and the blood bursts forth in a hot, slick stream. The taste is instant, sharp, metallic. It fills my mouth, filling the ache that's been in me for so long. It's warm, so warm. I tear into him, tearing his flesh apart, chewing, swallowing. I can't stop. I won't stop. The hunger is too strong, too consuming, and when I finish with him, I don't even feel full. I feel empty. I don't even remember how long it takes. Hours? Minutes? Time is meaningless here. There's just the hunger and the taste and the madness that's taking hold of me. When it's over, I look at Mary again. She's still smiling, still standing there, but there's something else in her eyes. Now, a flicker of something darker, something that wasn't there before. "You're one of us now," she says, her voice softer than it's ever been. "You've become just like us." And there's no turning back. I stand up, my legs unsteady, my body feeling like it's made of lead. The blood coats my hands, my face, my clothes, but it doesn't matter. To none of it matters anymore. I've done what I was meant to do. I've fed, but as I start to turn away, something catches my eye. It's not Henry, not Mary. It's something in the corner of the room, something that wasn't there before. A window. A small, cracked window, barely big enough for a person to fit through. But what catches my attention isn't the window itself. It's what's on the other side. A reflection. But it's not my reflection. It's someone else's. The person in the reflection looks exactly like me, but their eyes are wide, frantic, and full of terror. They're banging on the glass, as if trying to break through, but the window is sealed shut. I blink. The reflection vanishes. For a moment, I wonder if I'm imagining it. If it's just the blood, the hunger, the madness that's warped my mind. But then I see it again, just for a second. A face in the window looking out from the other side, staring at me with wide, desperate eyes. I stumble backward, my heart racing. What the hell is going on? Mary steps forward, her footsteps almost silent, and places a hand on my shoulder. "Don't look at it," she says softly. "You don't need to worry about that. We've already chosen you." I turn to face her, but the reflection is still there, waiting, pressing against the glass, screaming. But I can't hear the sound. The room is silent except for my own breathing. Mary's smile widens. "You'll understand soon enough." And as I stand there, staring at the face in the window, I feel something cold wrap around my chest. Something tightening, pulling me deeper into the darkness of this house, into the hunger, into this never-ending nightmare. But before I can move, before I can scream, the door slams shut, and I'm left standing alone in the room with the blood on my hands, and the hunger. I am hungry. Don't let her fool you. Don't let her fool you. I tilted my head as I read my mother's strange text. There was no context in a previous conversation or build-up to warrant the strange cryptic message. I hadn't texted my mother in a few hours, and even then, it was to remind her to pick up dog food on her way home from church that night. "Who are we talking about?" I replied and waited. Nothing. My dog, Lucy, suddenly lifted her head before letting out a series of loud barks as she ran towards the front door. The unexpected loud noise caused me to jump in my seat. My dog stared at the door and barked intensely. The door's window looked obscured by the darkness of the night outside, like an inky veil hiding whatever was making my dog nervous just behind it. I slid off my gaming headphones and began approaching the door. As I stepped down the hallway towards the door, I felt a strange unease as I looked at the doorknob, unlocked. We always lock our doors once the sun sets, but with my parents gone and myself distracted by my game, the thought of doing so had escaped my mind. As I reached the door, I quickly moved my hand and locked it before flipping on the porch light. The curtain of darkness was pulled back to reveal an empty porch. I scanned what little of the yard I could see through the window, looking for any sign of movement in the darkness, but there was none. I shushed my dog, assuming she was alerting over a bad dream or a reflection she saw in the window. She stopped barking, but remained alert, staring at the door with perked ears. I went around the house, locking the other two entrances before sitting back down on the couch. I took out my phone and looked down at my mother's message again. "Don't let her fool you." I clicked the call button. At this point I was wondering if she had meant to send the message to someone else. If she hadn't though, I wanted to know who the message was talking about, and how they were trying to fool me. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. Lucy came over and sat down next to me, looking around the room with great unease. "What's gotten into you?" I said as I reached down and patted her head. Without warning, Lucy lurched to her feet and began barking intensely at the back door now, startled. I tried calming her, but she refused to be pulled away or settled. "There is nothing out there," I said as I ran my hand over the hackles across her back, her barking refusing to stop. I stepped to the door and pulled the string that opened the faux blinds that obscured the window. "See? No one is there." I flipped on the light to the back porch to get a better view. As the light illuminated the porch, that was when I saw it on the door, something that was unnoticeable without the light from outside. A small round patch of fresh condensation on the outside of the window. I looked closer, not understanding at first what I was looking at or the implication it brought. I stepped back as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Something was just standing right outside my door. I jumped as I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Taking it out, I could see a new text from my mother. "I need your help. I'll be home soon." I quickly began typing out a reply. "Mom, something weird is going on here. I think someone is walking around the house." After sending the message, I remembered the cameras my parents had installed on the four corners of the house. I figured if someone was sneaking around and looking for a way to break in, they would show up on the camera. The app buffered for a few seconds before opening to the live camera view. I sat surprised as I looked at the screen. 3 of the 4 cameras were offline. Confused, I opened the motion recording section of the app. Think perhaps the cameras caught something before going offline. Nothing. There wasn't a single recording on the app. It was as though all the footage had been deleted and the recording feature turned off. An even more eerie feeling began to creep over me. I gasped as I backed out to the live camera page. The last camera was now offline. I opened the phone app and hovered my thumb over the keypad, about to dial 911. It could be nothing, just a dog acting strange, a random server issue with the cameras, and weird airflow causing the wet spot on the window. But I wasn't willing to take that kind of chance. If there was someone out there, then I needed someone here. I had just finished typing in the 3 numbers when a sharp series of knocks rang out from my front door. My heart sank, and I flinched as Lucy ran back to the front door, letting out a new flurry of her aggressive barks. I stepped into the hallway and stared at the door. I could see the faint silhouette of a person standing on the porch, but any details were swallowed up by the darkness of the night. As I stared at the figure, I heard a voice coming through the door. "Sweetheart, it's me. Come open the door." The voice sounded familiar, but completely new at the same time. "Who's there?" I called out, taking a few steps down the hallway. "It's your mom, silly. I forgot my keys when I left for the store. I need you to open the door so I can get started on dinner." A cold chill ran down my spine. My mother has a unique voice. Whoever was standing on the other side of the door was trying to replicate it. Certain parts of the cadence were spot on, but little things just felt wrong. "My mother is at church." I called out, "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave now before I call the police." A thick silence filled the air as I waited for a response. "I picked up some cosmic brownies at the store. I know they are your favorite. Please come open the door for me." I don't know what disturbed me more in that moment, the way she ignored my threat and kept up the charade, or the fact that she knew my favorite snack. "I'm calling the police. You need to get..." Thud. The woman stepped up to the door and slammed her fist against it. I could see her better now. The light from inside the house shone through the window and illuminated her rage-filled eyes. Lucy barked more aggressively at the better view of the woman. Lucy was always standoffish to strangers, but the way there was acting was way more aggressive than I had ever seen her before. "You will open this door this instant," she yelled, still trying to imitate my mother's voice. "I am your mother, and you will do as you're told." As I looked at the woman, a new sense of dread passed over me. The woman was not my mother, but she looked like her. She wore the same hairstyle. Her head shape and nose looked the same. She was even wearing an outfit I could have sworn I had seen my own mother wear before. But she wasn't my mother. There were small details. Different ears, eyes slightly too far apart. The woman looked as though her and my mum could do the doppelganger trend together. At a passing glance you might mistake the two, but I knew my mother. This wasn't her. I hit the call button on my phone and placed it to my ear. As I stepped back further from the door, the quiet ringing sound music to my ears. "I'm calling the police now," I yelled. "Get out of here." Thud, thud. The woman's fist slammed against the window of the door. "Open the damn door," she screamed, no longer hiding behind the imitation. "You will listen to your mother, or I'll give you a reason to be afraid." The 911 operator picked up and asked me what the emergency was, her calm, questioning voice feeling inappropriate given the fear I was feeling in that moment. I quickly recited my address as the woman at the door began pounding on the door harder, screaming vile obscenities between calm moments where she would plead for me to open the door in a now shattered impression of the woman that raised me. "Please hurry," I pleaded. "She is really trying to get in now." Crack. My heart sank as I saw a small crack form around the woman's hand as it slammed against the door. Without leaving another second to pass, I turned and ran. This woman was getting in the house, and I needed to find a place to hide before it was too late. I ran to the kitchen. My head spun as I considered my options, my brain distracted by the woman's screaming and pounding mixed with Lucy's incessant barking. I grabbed a kitchen knife and ran to my parents' bedroom, turning off the lights as I ran to hide my movements. I went into their walk-in closet and tucked myself into the back corner, covered behind layers of my father's coats and shirts. My whole body jumped as I heard the window shatter, followed by a pained scream from the woman. "Look what you made me do," she screamed before her voice suddenly calmed to a sickening sweet tone. "This cut is really bad, sweetheart. Can you bring me a Band-Aid? She's in the house." I whispered into the phone. The 911 operator instructed me to stay silent and in place while help was on the way. I could hear Lucy running around the house barking wildly. She wasn't a small dog, but she wasn't the type to actually get violent if push came to shove. I could hear the woman walking around the house, calling out for me in my mother's voice. "Sweetheart, this is all a misunderstanding. Come out and see me. Let me hold you." From the sound of it, she was looking around the kitchen and living room. "Lucy is acting really strange," she called out. "Maybe that diet we put her on has her acting weird. Come take a look at her for me." We had put Lucy on a special diet a few weeks before. We hadn't told anyone, but she knew. "You always did like playing hide and seek when you were little," she said, as I heard her step into my parents' room. "Even when no one else was playing. Just come out and see me." I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe. I muted my phone, so the operator's voice wouldn't be heard. I kept silent in crippling fear for my life. Every second an eternity, every sound of an approaching footfall, met with a further deepening pit in my stomach. "You were always so disobedient," she spoke softly, her voice stifling anger. "You were always my least favorite, but I still love you." I heard the clicking sound of the closet door as she turned the doorknob. "You should appreciate our family the way I do." I heard the door swing open. I could see flickers of light from the bedroom dance between the drapes that covered me. I knew any moment the horrid impersonator would pull back the clothes and kill me. I gripped the knife tighter. I have never been a fighter. I knew between my fear and lack of experience, I didn't stand a chance. I would fight, but I knew I would fail. Her hauntingly soft voice filled the closet. "Well, have such lovely family time to get." Her voice was cut off by the sounds of police sirens pulling down our road. She waited a moment and then sighed deeply. "So bad," she whispered, before I heard her footsteps quickly retreating out of the room. I began to hyperventilate as I heard the police call out, as they made their way into the house. I couldn't believe the ordeal was over. I walked in shock, as the police led me through the house that was covered in the blood trail. Lucy followed us around, refusing to leave my side. I sent up a small prayer thanking God that the lady didn't do anything to Lucy besides scare her. The police took me outside and questioned me on the events while other police scoured the area trying to find the woman. They never did. When my parents arrived home, I clung to them and cried in my mother's arms. Through my labored cries, I asked the only question I could think to ask at that moment. Who was she? How did you know?" My mother looked at me confused. "How did I know what, sweetheart?" "The woman. You sent those text messages." My mother's face went pale. "I haven't had my phone all night. I forgot it when I went to church. It was in the house somewhere." I looked down at my phone while trying to grasp the terrifying facts of the situation. The woman had been in the house at some point without me even knowing it. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my hand. A Facebook notification. My mother had tagged me in something. I opened the notification for my phone to take me to a small simple post only a few seconds old. It was 2 pictures. The first was a family photo we had taken a few years ago when we went on vacation to Disney World. The second photo was a photo of me, standing at the front door, looking out the window. Above the photos was a small line of text that simply read, "I love my family." That's it for tonight's stories, but the nightmares never end. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. Got a scary experience of your own? Share it in the comments. I just might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some things are scarier than they seem in the dark.